This compilation video has been sponsored by Surfshark VPN. More on them a little later. Hey Pokemon Masters, this is gonna get so distracting. You're gonna be so distracting. I have been up pretty much non-stop since the Indigo disc dropped, and I've got 10 more Easter eggs for you. We have 10 more Easter eggs for you, don't we, Ganondorf? Ooh, ooh, ooh. I love you. You're the best. You smell. These are my final 10 Easter egg secrets, things that I just think are very, very cool in the Indigo disc. Okay, let's start with number 1. This is just, like, without a doubt, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. In the Indigo disc, there is an area of land that looks just normal to anyone who would see it. However, thanks to this tweet that I have seen, it turns out it's the layout of the Nature Preserve, which is an area from Pokemon Black and White 2. And that's interesting to me, not just as an Easter egg, not just as a reference, but from a lore point of view. I can't help but wonder if the Nature Preserve actually was the Blueberry Academy just during a point in its development, before the dome was added, before it was lowered into the ocean. Remember, you'll know if you've seen one of my recent theories on the Indigo disc, the marine tube in Unova was constructed above land and then lowered into the sea. I wonder if before the Blueberry Academy was the dome we know it to be underwater, if it was just this little area, the Nature Preserve, was just part of it, and then eventually, of course, the dome would be added. It would be lowered into the ocean, so you can't fly there anymore, or at least not because of the dome. At minimum, a very cool Easter egg. The next couple little secrets, things of interest to me. In order to unlock them, you have to unlock the different styles of the Blueberry Academy, like, hangout room. The first one of which is in the horror room. If you talk or interact with the painting of the lady holding the bonnet, if you look very closely, the lady will blink, suggesting that she is in the painting and still cursed by the bonnet. In the sleek, futuristic monochrome room, we see the painting of the White Tree Hollow and the Black Tower. And what's interesting about this is that the Black Tower and White Tree Hollow of Unova are version-exclusive areas. I actually just did a video on this the other day. There is a theory, much like the theory I just told you about the Nature Preserve, but much, much longer and more in-depth, as to how both of these seemingly parallel universe paintings can be in the same place. But I'll leave that for that video, but very, very cool thing. And if you still want something else from that room, there's a cute little Cryogonal dangly. And I would like that in real life. And number 4, in the futuristic room, you can see what looks to be some kind of future Tyranitar, but it's not Ironabarbs, and something resembling a UFO. What are they? They're from the PokeStar Studios, another location in Unova, where you fought things that weren't quite Pokemon. Number 5, there's a whole bunch of new clothing items that you can unlock using your Blueberry points. These include the Team Aqua and Magma helmets from Oras, the Ball Guy helmet, and the helmet of Emma, which is the post-game of Pokemon X and Y, which is just such an obscure bit of Pokemon lore. Are they canon? These ones, probably not. Number 6, you can find Kleavor in the overworld. So this is the first place in modern day that we've seen wild Kleavor. And just very interestingly, in the Blueberry Academy, in the dome where this is, you see this black, obsidian black stone, like, jettisoning up from the floor. This, of course, is the Black Augurite, which evolves Scyther into Kleavor in the wild. It's interesting because I think in old Pokedex entries, Scyther actually mentions the fact that it comes from caves, and it seems that there are some Scyther living nearby around these caves, and then, yeah, on the very top, they've even managed to source some of the evolutionary item that allows it to evolve into Kleavor naturally. Meaning this Pokemon is not extinct. Number 7, I think we've all probably seen this one by now, Pride Rock. There is a rock that looks a lot like Pride Rock from The Lion King, but it is not just a coincidental rock, because if you go to the top, you'll find a Pyroar. Number 8, don't think you're done with the depths of Area 0. This one's less of an Easter egg, just more of a secret that I think you will find very, very cool. If you make your way to the underdepths of Area 0 after unlocking the Koraidon Fly ability, then there are actually 2 new areas that you can go and explore. I don't want to ruin it quite for you. I'd rather that you went and discovered it for yourself if you don't already know, but effectively you'll find one of those kind of terrestrial dome doors that you cannot get through. So in order to do it, you're going to have to go find the other stellar terrestrial Pokemon that's lurking in the caves. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And once you beat that stellar boss, it'll unlock a room filled with all sorts of treasure, some hidden treasure in Area 0. Go find it, it's really, really fun. 9, in the very last video, I mentioned that Crispin was from Verbank, and you can sort of see this on the menu screen as you're doing the Elite Four trial, but it turns out Lacey is from Nimbasa, and Amaris, is that how you say her name? I'm not 100% sure. The Steel type Elite Four member, she is from Castelia. She's from Castelia City. There are actually a number of little references to Castelia City generally. We'll include these as extra ones because I kind of did this Easter egg in the last video, and that is, for example, if you chat with, say, Larry in the club room, if you invite him in, he'll ask you what your favorite Unovan cuisine is. If you say a Castelia cone, he'll go and try one. If you chat to Brassius, he'll start talking about the Unovan Castelia City gym leader, which of course is Berg, another artist just like him. So there's a lot of Castelia City references, so we'll include that all as one big one. Number 10, the secret boss of the Blueberry Academy, and there's a little Easter egg that comes with this, even if you know who it is. But it is, of course, none other than the Blueberry Academy director, Cyrano. And here's the interesting thing about Cyrano, is when you defeat him, he gives you a new title. He says that you will become the Blueberry King. He also says it's been decades since he's last lost a battle, which implies that he's a really good Pokemon trainer. Like, he must be a world-famous Pokemon trainer. But here's the thing. He names you the Blueberry King. And why would he do that? Was he the king before you? Well, as I'm sure you're all already aware, it's kind of the first Easter egg to do with the Indigo Disc, because it's the first thing we all saw. Cyrano is wearing the Scarf of Aegis, a item highly associated with kings, so he is literally passing the crown to you, which makes sense for a game that not only follows on from the last final DLC, the Crown Tundra, but also is all about terrestrial crowns. Now, these next two secrets are about Pokemon Horizons, and they're so well hidden you won't have heard of them before in any of my videos. In fact, they're only findable in this compilation video on YouTube, and the second one I've added especially thanks to the sponsor of this compilation, Surfshark VPN, who helped me find this cheeky little Easter egg in episodes of Pokemon Horizons, which are available on US Netflix, but not here for those of us who live in the Galar region. So the first one quickly is that there's an in-game event for Lico's Sprigatito, and if you look at the trainer ID, it's 230414. And this is a reference to the original air date of Pokemon Horizons in Japan, the 14th of April 2023. If only I could actually be in Japan when those new episodes aired, or on US Netflix to get all the bonus content they get. Well, luckily for those Galarians among us, there is hope. Surfshark VPN routes your connection through another country, and with 100 available countries, digitally speaking, I can be in Japan, or in the US, or anywhere else I want in the world, so I won't miss a thing. And that's not even the main benefit. By routing your data this way, Surfshark protects you from online hackers. You can surf the web like you're using a Max Repel and thwart off any cyber attackers. And if you use the link in the description or the QR code on screen and use code BIRDKEEPER, you'll get 3 months for absolutely free. This is useful for security and for accessing the content you want no matter where you are. For example, originally, and this is Easter egg number 2, in episode 4 of the Pokemon Horizons anime, if you look at the original version, there's this shot of Roy eating an Oranberry. But that shot is not in the version that we can find in the UK. I don't know where it was cut. Maybe Galarians have a thing against Oranberries. It's probably because they're not as good as citrus. Anyway, what are you waiting for? Don't miss out on the original versions of content and stay safe online. Use the link at the top of the description or scan the QR code on screen and use code BIRDKEEPER to get your 3 months for free. And now we look at the Easter eggs and secrets in the Kanto region.
Number 1, in Professor Oak's lab, in the top right-hand corner, there is a bookshelf, a regular-looking bookshelf, and right on the top of it, there's this little notebook. It has a particular design with a clover on the front of the cover. I can't believe I didn't notice this before. This notebook is the notebook that Professor Oak owns when he's Sammy Oak as a child in Pokemon, the 4th movie, Pokemon Forever. It's the notebook that he draws Pokemon in, and if you don't know who Sammy is, it's Professor Oak from the past, traveling to the future. It's a whole thing, Samuel Oak. And yeah, what an amazing Easter egg! Cool little reference. What does that mean? Is it connected to the real Pokemon, the anime Pokemon verse? Probably not. Number 2 is another big one. When challenging Lieutenant Surge to a battle, Lieutenant Surge will tell you that Pokemon battles are war. This completely debunks Pokemon theories everywhere that even I subscribe to, which is the idea that the Pokemon War was a real thing. Lieutenant Surge references it, he's a key piece of evidence in that whole puzzle, and they have now changed the dialogue to say that a Pokemon battle is war, which means that there was never a Pokemon War. Lieutenant Surge was literally just referencing Pokemon battling. And now don't I feel stupid. Number 3, after you defeat Lieutenant Surge, you get an autograph from him, which of course is the same autograph that we see in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon in the main character's room. Now, whether it's the exact same autograph or a replica, another one of it, we don't know that yet, although there is a Pokemon theory coming out later this week that is going to tackle that idea a little bit further on. But yes, this autograph is a direct connection and reference to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Number 4, when you're aboard the SS Anne, when you talk to the old gentleman that used to say that he was a global police officer in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, he now says that he's a member of the International Police. Hot on the tail of Team Rocket. Now, people used to speculate that this character was Looker. That theory has now been debunked. This character is another member, though, of the International Police, the organization that Looker works for. Number 5 is that the trainers in the Cerulean Gym are actually all named after Misty's sisters from the TV show. Which makes perfect sense because when Misty isn't in the gym in the show, her sisters run the gym. And number 6, in Celadon City, after beating Brock, you can meet Brock outside I think he's outside the Game Freak headquarters. And Brock basically just talks about all the beautiful girls who work in the Celadon City gym, which is a complete reference to the anime and Brock's portrayal as a bit of a womanizer or woman-obsessed human. Number 7, in the Cinnabar Island labs, you can find a picture of Professor Fuji. This, of course, is a reference to Mr. Fuji, the Pokemon caretaker in Lavender Town, who used to be a scientist who worked on, supposedly, the Mewtwo project. Which also makes sense because in the Pokemon First movie, Dr. Fuji is the person who clones Mewtwo, so potentially they're all the same character. Number 8, at some point in the story, after encountering Blue, he will give you the Shallow Sable, which is an item, it's a confectionery item that has come from the Kalos region. As well as that, a little bit later on, Blue gives you Mega Stones. Both of these items are very Kalos oriented, so I don't know whether it's suggesting that Blue has already been to Kalos. Interestingly enough, there is a reference to Blue in Pokemon X and Y, and they talk about how this guy couldn't get the Kalos, couldn't get the language down, but he could easily say, smell you later. So whether this is to imply that Blue has already done his travels in Kalos, although that doesn't line up with the timeline, or whether Blue has spent some extra time out there that we don't know about, I don't know, but fun little reference. Number 9, in the Pokemon Power Plant in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, whenever you would encounter a Pokeball, sometimes it'd be an item and sometimes it'd be a Voltorb. Now they've left a distinction. The upside down Pokeballs are the ones that are Pokemon, but of course because they're upside down, they are Electrode. Because Electrode look like an upside down Pokeball. Number 10, in the Silphco headquarters, there are pictures of various locations in Pokemon. There appears to be the Alolan Archipelago, as well as Spear Pillar and Equatique City's Tin Tower. Number 11, at the very end of the game, when you defeat your rival and beat the champion, Professor Oak tells you something that is so different to Red, Blue, and Yellow. In these games, he tells your rival that your rival was too kind, and that's why you managed to beat him. He wasn't tough enough, he wasn't gritty enough, and this is a complete flip side reverse of what Professor Oak tells your rival in Red, Blue, and Yellow, that the reason that he lost is because he was too arrogant and too powerful and didn't care about his Pokemon. Oak, make up your mind, buddy. Speaking of Oak, number 12, he does say to Blue at some point, now, what's your name again? And Blue says, come on, that joke is never funny. This, of course, is a complete reference to the first generation of games when you get to choose your rival's name, and Oak asks you, this is my grandson. What's his name again? The idea is, it was just a joke. And again, speaking of your rival, number 13, it turns out that Blue never had a Pokedex. In a little bit of flavor dialogue, Oak says that you are the first trainers to have the Pokedex, and that's really cool because when he went on his Pokemon adventure, he used to just scribble on a map the areas that Pokemon were. Which is really bad news for a lot of the Pokemon theories I've done. I actually should do a video how many Pokemon theories I made could be debunked, because it looks like they've all been written by kids. Not Pokemon scientists, it's not an official encyclopedia. Number 14, of course, after you defeat the game, the Viridian City gym leader is now Blue. Blue has taken over the gym, much like he did in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Pokemon Gold and Silver. And interestingly enough, this was referenced in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon with a side quest that mentioned a character called Ace Trainer Arabella. This was one of the gym trainers from Blue's gym in the Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Gold Silver Crystal. So it looks like the idea of, they were setting up for people to start thinking about the idea of Blue being the gym leader of the Viridian City gym, and after you beat Giovanni, he takes over. Even talks about redecorating, which is exactly what he does for the Gen 2 games. Number 15, Mina. Mina appears in the game. She's one of my favorite characters from the Alola region, if not the whole of Pokemon. I love the design of this character. Mina appears as a much younger character, and there's actually big conflicts here with the Pokemon timeline, because while at a short estimate, the timeline is 10 years long, and at the more accurate, I believe, a 20-year timeline, the timeline is, of course, 20 years from these games, at least generation of games, to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Either way, there becomes a contradiction, because there's no way that this version of Mina is like 9 years old or younger. So if she's at least 10 in a 10-year timeline, by Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon standards, she would be 20, and in a 20-year timeline, she'd be 30. And in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you're not supposed to be a trial captain if you're over 20. So that's something I'm going to look into in my next video. Number 16, this is one you've probably already seen. Upstairs in the top left-hand corner of your bedroom, there is a poster that references the first ever Pokemon battle, which appears in the intro of Pokemon Red and Blue. Number 17, Archer appears. Archer, one of the Team Rocket admins from Pokemon, again from Heart Gold, Soul Silver. They appear as Giovanni's second in command, and that makes sense because they also kind of appeared in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Back then, they were just a rocket executive using the same kind of team, but it was almost definitely Archer who was heading up the Sevi Island little side quest that went on in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Number 18, outside the Birlliant City Gym, there are red and blue barrels. They are also inside the gym, and people thought that this was going to solve the puzzle of the Birlliant City Gym, where you have to look inside the barrels, look inside the bins to see where the switches are, and it turns out that's not the case. So in that case, what are they there for? What are they about? Well, they are just a little reference, I think, to Pokemon Red and Blue. Number 19, there is also someone in Birlliant City who seems to be obsessed with either a puppy Pokemon or a cat Pokemon, Arcanine or Persian, depending on the version you're playing. And the version that's obsessed with Persian might be a reference to the Cat Scratch Girl of Kanto, which appears in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, aka your player character's mum. They're obsessed with Meowth, they moved from Kanto, and it seems that there's a lot of ties to your player in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and Birlliant City, including Lieutenant Surge's autograph. I think in your house in Pokemon Sun and Moon, you have a Ditto doll, which appears in the Pokemon Fan Club, which is in this region, as well as there being a Farfetch'd leak. That's in your house in Sun and Moon, and you can trade for Farfetch'd conventionally in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow in Birlliant City. There seems to be a lot of ties. Whether this is a direct reference or not, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at nothing here. Number 20, Giovanni wears a wedding ring. Usually, in Giovanni's character art, in every iteration, Giovanni's hand has been in his pocket, so you don't get to see this hand. But now he seems to be wearing a wedding ring, as well as another ring which is supposedly significant of a happy marriage. This could be a reference to another Team Rocket executive, Ariana. Ariana is another one of Team Rocket's higher-up executives in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and is theorized to be the mother of Silver, who is Giovanni's son. So this could help tie that theory together. Number 21, the guy who teaches your Pikachu how to surf is in Fuchsia City, and this is relevant for two reasons. Number one is that Fuchsia City is where you got surf in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow in the Safari Zone, which of course no longer exists. And in Pokemon Yellow version, the game that these are the spiritual kind of successors to, in Pokemon Yellow version, there used to be a surfing Pikachu minigame where Pikachu would get on a surfboard, and of course the way that you surf in these games is with Pikachu on a surfboard. That was also based south of Fuchsia City. Number 22, in Celadon City there is the Game Freak headquarters, and of course, as well as there being notable members of Game Freak staff there are also posters referencing Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Oh, and Green. Green is there as well. Number 23, in your bedroom in these games, if you're playing Pokemon Yellow version, there is a Pikachu doll and a book. This same Pikachu doll and book appear in your player's room in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and Pokemon Sun and Moon. Again, more connections, little references, something from my theory coming out later this week. Number 24! You can rebattle the Elite Four in these games, and when you re-challenge Agatha and beat her, she'll talk about how her and Professor Oak used to be rivals, like you and Trace. This is a nice little way to flesh out the relationship between these two characters, which previously we've only really known that they don't really get on anymore, but there used to be some history where they admired each other. Certainly she admired him for being handsome and strong, but now he's all soft and he just studies Pokemon, tinkering with his Pokedex. Well, it turns out the relationship that they had is one of rivals. Although I always secretly hope something a little bit more than that. OTP! Okay, number 25. In this game, you can ride Snorlax. Go Team Snooze. Snorlax is like one of my favorite Pokemon, and the way that you ride Snorlax may well be a reference to My Neighbor Totoro and the way that the characters ride Totoro's stomach, which also is interesting because a lot of people have always said that Snorlax looks like Totoro, so that's a thing. I still haven't seen that movie. I really need to see My Neighbor Totoro. Number 26, we're over halfway there. After you complete the game, you can go to Oak's lab and go on his computer, and you'll see an email going on with someone called Samson. This, of course, is his cousin, Samson Oak of the Alola region. Number 27, in Cerulean City, there is the bike shop, but you can no longer buy bikes in these games, because instead you ride on Pokemon. So instead, this is a bike collector, and there you can find and learn more about the Mac and Acro bike from the Hoenn region. Number 28, if you surf right from the Vermilion City docks, you will find a truck. This truck, of course, is a reference to the truck that, in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, was theorized to secretly hide Mew underneath it. And sure enough, if you go to the back of the truck and you interact with it, you can find a revive. No Mew though, sadly. Number 29, in the Celadon City game corner, you can find a poster that the Team Rocket grunt stands in front of. And that poster has on it a rainbow, as well as a rocket and a Grimer, and I think there's a coughing on there as well. This, of course, Rainbow Rocket, is a reference to Team Rainbow Rocket, the version of Team Rocket that appears in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Number 30 and 31 lumped together here, depending on whether you're playing, I think it's either depending on whether you're playing Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee, or depending on whether you're playing a male or female character. I actually don't know which one it is. But in one version, if you hit the TV screen downstairs, you will see a reference for a movie that will talk about 4 boys traveling on some railroad tracks together, while in the alternate version it will talk about a girl walking down a road of yellow brick. These, of course, are references to the movies Stand By Me and The Wizard of Oz. Number 32, also up in your bedroom, you've probably seen this one. There is a calendar that has a sprite on it from the original sprites from the old Pokemon games. But these calendars appear all throughout the region, showing different sprites from those games. Number 33, Master Trainers appear in this game, and I have no doubt that there are more references that I don't know about yet. But the Zubat and Golbat trainers are named West and Keaton, and these are references to the actors who played Batman, Adam West and Michael Keaton. Zubat, Golbat, they're Batmen. Number 34, in Saffron City, there is a house where a young boy will talk about the Mimic Girl being quite cute, or the Copycat Girl. The Copycat Girl lives in a house slightly to the north in Saffron City, and this boy talks about how one day he wants to catch her a Clefairy, or I think give her a Clefairy doll. And this, of course, is a reference to Pokemon Gold and Silver, in which the girl has to move from that house so they can build the train connecting Johto to Kanto. And she loses the Clefairy that her boyfriend got her, which is probably this boy. Number 35, on Cinnabar Island in the underground Pokemon lab, we can now more clearly see that this is the place that Mew was cloned and created Mewtwo, because downstairs there is a cloning test tube that something's tried to break out from the inside. Clearly it is the origins of Mewtwo. And number 36, this isn't the only legendary reference in the Cinnabar Mansion. In fact, you can find the Master Trainers there for Meltan and Melmetal. And that's interesting because Meltan and Melmetal are said to be made of the element Mercury, which is said to come from the rock Cinnabar Island. Number 37, this is only a small little reference, but the character of Blaine, the hot-headed quiz master, gives you a whole bunch of little questions that you have to pass that in order to battle him. But with the last question, all of the answers are correct. This may well be a reference to Kiawe from the Alola region, who has the exact same kind of setup. There's a whole bunch of questions, but the last one, all of the answers are correct before you engage in battle. Number 38, when you rematch Blaine in the postgame, he will express interest in the character of Green. This is because Green is off looking for Mewtwo, and Blaine is supposedly said to be Professor Fuji's brother, making him Blaine Fuji, and was part of the creation of Mewtwo on Cinnabar Island, the place where he's the gym leader. And number 39, when you re-challenge another gym leader, Sabrina, she will say that she can see into the future, and that a trainer as strong as you won't come along for another 3 years. And this is a reference to the player character from Pokemon Gold and Silver, because Gold and Silver are set 3 years after the Kanto games. That really helps you out with the timeline as well, like it's a very solid 3 years, that's when it's going to happen. Number 40, again on Cinnabar Island, and this one, for the life of me, I couldn't find again in the footage when I redid it, but I definitely took note of it when playing. Someone somewhere around Cinnabar Island references the idea that the volcano might explode, and in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the volcano does exactly that. It erupts, causing the whole of Cinnabar Island to change its shape. Number 41, Pikachu and Eevee's new abilities. They can fly and they can surf, conventionally things these Pokemon can't do, except with Pikachu it is a reference to the Pokemon card game and many other medias where we've seen Pikachu flying and surfing before. It's a very common trope for Pikachu. And now for numbers 42 through 47. Yes, I'm counting them all as separate, and I really want to hit that big old 49 number. It was very important to me that I reached that number. In the Celadon game corner, there are of course references to a bunch of Pokemon side games. If you engage with any of the arcade machines, there are references to the Surfing Pikachu minigame, that being from Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Dash with Pokemon being raised into the air on balloons, Pokemon Trozy with lining up 3 Pokemon faces. Pokemon Quest, that's actually not in the Celadon Game Corner, that's in the Celadon Mart. There's lots of little references and posters to Pokemon Quest. And of course the Pokemon Tournament, which references Pikachu wearing a mask. There's also one that talks about a bunch of Pokemon going to a goal together. I'm not sure which minigame or side game that's referencing, but I suspect it might be Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. But if you've got better thoughts about that, you'll have to let me know. And I guess that makes it that these games and a lot of the Pokemon side games are games that exist in the Pokemon world. They're the games that the Pokemon characters play. Number 48, Green appears in these games in the post-game. And she is searching for Mewtwo, which makes total sense because when she first appears in the manga, she is searching for the Pokemon Mew. So it's very integral and core to her character. She's hunting these legendary Pokemon. Also, I love that her character is back. I just love it. Number 49. In these games, Red also reappears in the post-game as the final challenge, which of course is a reference to the final challenge status that Red has in Pokemon Gold, Silver, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, and Crystal. And his team has changed a little bit. He has an Arcanine and a Machamp now. And this has rotated out other Pokemon in his team, and his team has changed before. In original Gold and Silver, he has Espeon. In Heart Gold, Soul Silver, he has Lapras instead. And now they've decided to separate the starters out. Rather than him having Blastoise, Venusaur, and Charizard, he just has Venusaur. Blue has Charizard, and Green has Blastoise, and they all have their Mega forms. And the fact that Red has Venusaur is a reference to the manga in which Red had Bulbasaur as his first starter Pokemon. Well, after Pikachu and Poliwhirl. And finally, okay, number 50, kind of, it's not a real Easter egg. It's just something I'm really annoyed about. In Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, there is a particular bird keeper in the game. Now, in Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Gold, Silver, and Crystal, there is a bird keeper Toby, the person that I am named after, a character that uses 3 Doduo. And the only reason that I remembered that character and decided to name my channel after him is because down the road, there was a bird keeper Theo in Olivine City, and Theo is my brother's name. So I thought, oh, bird keeper Toby, Theo, it's us. I'm Birdkeeper Toby, hence my channel began. Well, in this game, one of the master trainers is called Birdkeeper Theo. I'm right here, Game Freak. So that's your honorary number 50, not number 50. Actually, if you want a number 50, I have found something after making this video. After defeating the Elite Four, when you rematch Koga, he'll say that he wants to be a good role model for his daughter, and when you beat him, he says he's considering joining the Elite Four. This is of course a reference to the Generation 2 games, in which Koga is no longer the Fuchsia City gym leader, his daughter Janine is, and he joins the Elite Four. These of course are the references that I have picked up on. Which ones did you find the most interesting? Which ones were you like, Toby, that's not a real reference? You're just making stuff up, padding out those numbers. I'm sorry, and I'd love to hear what ones you think I've missed as well, of course, in the comments. There is a big Pokemon theory connecting a lot of these coming on later on this week. I hope you're enjoying Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee as much as I have, and of course, I hope you're having a wonderful day, wherever you are. So hi, Pokemon Masters. Birdkeeper Toby here, and I've been looking forward to revisiting this topic, and I say revisiting because in this video I'm going to be sharing all of the Easter eggs, hints, and secrets that pointed towards Birlliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, Diamond and Pearl remakes that appeared in Pokemon Sun and Moon for the 3DS, because these were the games after Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and this was how early we were talking about Sinnoh confirmed. We've been saying Sinnoh confirmed for a long time, but obviously this was 5 years ago, so were the hints that we were seeing in these games, were they really hints, or were we just seeing what we wanted to see? I don't know, it'd be interesting to try and scour them and find hints for Gen 5 remakes. I don't think you could do it. I think some of the hints were actually kind of legitimate. There was a lot pointing towards Generation 4 coming back. But hopefully we can do this trip down memory lane and laugh at me together, because I definitely covered all of this stuff back when it was all happening. So without further ado, let's look at 10 very legitimate hints for Generation 4 remakes in Sun and Moon. You know what they say, a broken clock is at least right 2 times a day. Starting off with number 1, Cyrus and Cynthia. Their names literally mean sun and moon. Cyrus is the sun and Cynthia is the moon. So in the generation where the main games are Sun and Moon, it felt pretty reasonable to assume that in this generation we would see Generation 4 remakes. I think I was expecting them perhaps after Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but instead we moved to the Switch and we got Let's Go. But come on, Toby, a couple of naming conventions does not mean a lot by itself. Well, how about this? Number 2, on Mealy Mealy Island, which of course is one of the Alolan Islands inspired by real-life Hawaii, there are 2 areas inspired by Pearl Harbor and the Diamond Head volcano. pearl and a diamond. A diamond and pearl. I think we've since learned that the area that people thought was inspired by Pearl Harbor wasn't actually inspired by Pearl Harbor. It's a totally different harbor in Hawaii. But the point at the time, I remember that was such a big point of contention. People are like, okay, Sun and Moon, Cynthia and Cyrus, and then Diamond Head Volcano, Pearl Harbor. It's sounding pretty convincing to me, especially when added in with number 3, Silvally, a legendary Pokemon that just randomly appears in Sun and Moon, inspired by the Arceus. It's got the RKS system where it can change type depending on the item it's holding, which is the exact same as Arceus. It's the Arceus system. Now, one generation earlier in Pokemon X and Y, as a way of hinting towards Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire coming out, they gave you a gift Torchic holding a Mega Stone. It's kind of a way of saying, hey, the Hoenn starters are going to get Mega Evolutions. Hoenn remakes are coming. So, what did they do with Pokemon Sun and Moon as like an early pre-order gift bonus? They gave us a Munchlax. A Munchlax! A Generation 4 Pokemon holding its Z-Crystal. So, it seemed pretty likely that Gen 7 was going to see Sinnoh remakes happen. Additionally, point number 5, there was a real lack of Sinnoh Pokemon in the Sun and Moon Pokedex. I think there was only like 3 evolutionary lines that appeared, like the Gible line, the Luminion line, and then another evolutionary line. There was like no Sinnoh native Pokemon in the Alolan Pokedex. So again, like, well, if generations like complete each other, sort of feels like even as I'm saying it now, it almost seems surprising that they didn't do Diamond and Pearl remakes as part of Generation 8. And that's just the first 5 points. They're pretty quick points. Number 6, thematically, it would really fit, because what did Sun and Moon introduce? The Ultra Beasts. Legendary Pokemon from other dimensions. Sounds a lot like, Dialga, Palkia, Spearpillar, dimensional portals. And in these dimensions, there were like alternate worlds, which in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon we explored as the Ultra Spaces, the various Ultra Spaces. That's the Distortion world. That just reminds you of the Distortion world. In fact, in the games, the lab that studies these interdimensional Pokemon has several books talking about Palkia and its ability to bend space, and Bronzong and its ability to open portals. Number 7, in Pokemon Sun and Moon, there were returning characters to the battle tree at the end of the game. Wally showed up, but I guess that makes sense because Oras was the game before this. We also see Red and Blue, but of course it's the 20th anniversary with these, so they wanted to, show off those classic characters. And Cynthia shows up. Why did they need to have Cynthia's model on the 3DS ready and waiting? Sort of seemed like maybe they were pointing towards something that didn't happen on the 3DS. Number 9, the Rotom Dex. Rotom, I know it seems like normal now because we got the Rotom phone and the Rotom bike in Galar, but before this point, the only new Rotom forms we had came in Platinum version. Suddenly, Rotom's seeing love with the Rotom Dex. Rotom's getting new forms must mean Gen 4 remakes are coming. And those are just the first 8 points. How did Diamond and Pearl remakes? How did Brilliant Diamond and Shiny Pearl? How was that not part of Generation 7? I genuinely don't know. For number 9, we'll look outside of the games. We'll do 2 honorable mentions for number 9. Number 9, in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, a lot of people pointed to the fact that you could see pictures of Spearpillar inside the Silphco building, which there were a lot of pictures in the Silphco building, including of areas of like Johto, for example. But still, it convinced a lot of people that still, as part of that generation, because Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out before Sword and Shield, people thought, oh, well, maybe they do Let's Go now, and maybe Diamond and Pearl will come as Let's Go games or something, like as an extension to this or as like a DLC to this. There were a lot of ideas that were thrown out there. And as another similar kind of more tangential honorable mention, I guess a 9.5 if you will, they did the 20th anniversary movie, which is part of the Sun and Moon era, featuring the mythical Pokemon Marshadow, and featured 2 new companion characters for Ash, created entirely for the movie, Verity and Sorrel. And Verity is from Sinnoh, has a Piplup, and is obviously related to Cynthia. We can argue about that later. And Sorrel has a Lucario. Why would they both have Sinnoh-focused Pokemon? And they're both from the Sinnoh region? But it didn't happen then. And finally, so Going back in time, if you are a Pokemon fan in 2016 going into 2017, and you run a Pokemon YouTube channel, and you're thinking about what Pokemon games are next, I just want to defend myself here and say, I don't think it was that ridiculous that I believed that Gen 4 remakes would be part of that generation. Obviously, when Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon got announced, it became kind of weird because we were like, hang on, surely this should wait till after the Sinnoh remakes. And then when Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out, it was like, oh, I guess they're just waiting until the next generation. And to be fair, while I did see these hints and I was like, oh wow, it looks like they might actually do it, I wasn't convinced that we would see Diamond and Pearl remakes until at least 2019, 2020, and here we are going into 2021 or end of 2021, and now we're finally getting them. So based on the timescale I was expecting, that makes sense. But based on the hints that were in game, I genuinely thought that perhaps in 2017, were we really going to see Sinnoh remakes so soon? However, you might have realized I'm not at number 10 yet, because number 10 is one of those things where like I look at all of the aforementioned points and I think, yeah, I'm not like trying to see things there. Because I don't think I could go to these games and find hints for the, I couldn't find hints for the Unova games. Like I'm not gonna look through Sun and Moon and find hints that point towards Unova remakes. That just doesn't make sense. But my goodness, the one that I'm glad I never covered at the time, number 10 on this list, the clouds. The clouds. When Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon got announced, there was a little poster image of the Alola region, the new changed Alola from Sun and Moon to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And there, of course, above Pony Island is a big, dark, circular cloud, a void that perhaps looks a little bit like the access to the distortion world, which, to be fair, it does. But then there were also other parts of the clouds that people were saying looked like Dialga and Palkia. And like, this was huge enough that you can search today, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon clouds, Dialga and Palkia, and you will find the various tweets and posts and references to this that people were talking about, because people genuinely believed it. And that was one of those bits of evidence that I just thought, okay, maybe not.
On to 10 missable things in the world of Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield.
The hidden references and Easter eggs.
So, number one, we'll start off with I guess, quite a tame one. Number one, just outside the city of Circhester, which, by the way, is based on the real-world location of Bath. I have been there a lot. Of course, if you're up north, you say Bath instead of Bath, and the Roman baths that you find there. Anyway, the city of Circhester, which has the most gorgeous music in the whole game, and a shop that sells this bag that, like, why isn't this a real bag? Anyway, these are not the hidden references or Easter eggs. I'm just gushing about the game. No, just outside the city of Circhester is a man who says that people often swim from the Galar region to Kalos. Blimey, that is pretty impressive, and maybe a reference to where the world of Kalos is in the relation to Galar in the Pokemon world map that I worked on years ago. Except, hold up a second, Kalos is based off of France, the Galar is based off of England, so of course it is a reference to the English Channel, which yes, some hardy swimmers have managed to tackle before. Of course, this is really interesting and kind of tells you that, yeah, the Pokemon world is just now, actually, my map is totally wrong, and actually is just kind of mapped on top of our world, except no. Because in the Kalos region, there is a swimmer who says that they've swam from Hoenn, which, if that's based on its location in the real world, that would be Japan, and Japan to France has not happened. I don't know that, I'm not Googling it, I'm just pretty sure. So, thanks for the confusing lore, Game Freak. Okay, next up on this list, number 9. So, there's a point in the story where you meet Marnie, your new rival, and she's staying in the same hotel that you are getting ready for the gym challenge. Now, I didn't walk around or check out the hotel, so I don't actually know if this is playing in the right order, but what I did do is I did my whole adventure, and it turns out in the post-game you can re-battle Marnie in her hometown of Spikemuth, which is awesome, and you know, that's where her character stays. Unless, however, you travel back to the hotel, and I assume if you haven't initiated this cutscene already, she's still staying in the hotel. You can walk into one of the rooms in the hotel, and she's pulling faces with Morpeko. Oh, I guess they're playing Peekaboo. I guess, more peekaboo. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, she's pulling faces with Morpeko, but this was really weird to me because I had just seen her in Spikemuth. I'm assuming that this cutscene was meant to be played much earlier on in the game, but you can totally visit it in the post-game, which, I don't know, sounds like a little bit of a mistake to me. Unless, no, not unless. She's in Spikemuth. Next up, number 8. Yes, there is a ghost girl in Galar. So, in the Galar region, in the city of Hammerlock, on the eastern side of the Hammerlock Pavilion, I don't know why I said the word pavilion there, I just wanted to sound fancy. Anyway, on the eastern side of the city, there's a young girl who would like you to take an old, faded letter to a character over in the town where the fairy gym is. Bellanoma? The new names, I'm still getting used to them. Anyway, you take the letter to this old man, Frank, who asks how his friend was, and says that him and his friend, they used to be friends when they were younger, and then he moved away when she was young, and he misses her. He asks, how is my old friend? Which really confuses you, the player character, because she was a little girl, and the letter is old and faded, and this is something he's clearly not quite got over. If you go back to visit the little girl, you realize she was never there. And if you click A on the spot where she was standing, you find the Reaper Cloth, an item used to evolve ghost-type Pokemon. Little girl dead. The little girl, she dead. She died. What's even weirder is if you go back to Frank's house, there is a little kid in the corner of the house talking to the wall, and if you try and speak with her, she says, "Shh, stop it, you're trying to interrupt our conversation." Sorry, what? Number 7, this one's just a little Easter egg that you might have noticed very quickly. This is the new Gigantamax Gengar. Nice, new form as well as having had a Mega, that's really wicked. Huh, this seems familiar to me. Oh wait, it's the Gengar building from Festival Plaza. It's basically the same thing. Pretty sure that's the inspiration. Or maybe it was a reference forward to Gigantamax. Anyway, it's the same thing. Didn't even have to look that one up. I realized it and no one else has mentioned it yet, so there you go. Number 6, speaking of weird buildings, Gigantamax Duraludon is in the house. For those of you who don't live in the UK, or even for those of you who do live in the UK, because apparently H-Trainer Liam didn't know this in his stream, Duraludon is not based off any old skyscraper. It's based off of the Shard, which for those of you who don't know, it's the tallest building in the UK. I think it's the tallest building in Europe. It is in every London skyline video that you've ever seen. And it's most recognizable by the fact it's kind of a triangular shape with the 3 kind of shard pieces at the top, which is exactly what's going on with Gigantamax Duraludon. It is an icon of London landmark, and even if you don't think you've seen the Shard before, you've probably seen the Shard before. It's pretty famous. Next one, although I'm going to couple them together because I didn't come up with either of these. My friends PD Winnell and Kirsten came up with both of these. But thank you for letting me use them in your video. There are kind of 2 little things here. Totally unrelated. Number 1, back in Circhester, you know, the town with the gorgeous music that's based off a place I go to a lot. I really like that town. Anyway, in Circhester, in the shopping centre, where there's the really cool bag that they should bring into real life. Okay, I'm going to stop. There is a Pikachu top and an Eevee top, but they're named incorrectly. They are named the wrong way around. The Pikachu top is named the Eevee top, and the Eevee top is named the Pikachu top. And the second part of this, entirely unrelated, kind of another ghost girl situation. There is a lady in the Galar region who stares deeply into the flames of her 2 Litwick and says that it helps calm her down. She just seems very entranced by their flames. But the thing is, Litwick's Pokedex entry talks about how it burns a light that absorbs the life force of those that look into it. And that becomes the fuel that it burns. So yeah, another ghost girl. Number 4, this is a kind of very missable thing. It is more to do with the Pokemon, so you might not consider this part of this list, although I did just do 2, so, you know, roundabout ways, we still hit. And that is that Poltegeist has 2 different forms, and not a lot of people seem to know this yet. Both Sinistea and Poltegeist. It turns out that in the Galar region, there are a lot of forgeries of the pot that Poltegeist likes to live in. As a result of that, there is a forgery form and like an actual authentic form. And I'm not quite sure what the determining factor is between which item you use to evolve a Sinistea into Poltegeist and which one is actually an authentic pot. I believe there is the chipped pot and the cracked pot, something along those lines, but the only way you can tell is on your Sinistea if it has the mark of authentication underneath it. Without that, your Pokemon is a fraud, and that is a really cool hidden form to have. Number 3, Morimoto and Game Freak. They are always in the games. You can always find the Game Freak staff somewhere, and they are upstairs in a hotel in Circhester. Circhester, by the way, has the best music in the game, and there's this bag in the shop there that they really need to make a real bag. And also, have I mentioned that it's based off of Bath? I really like Circhester. Anyway, upstairs, by talking to Game Freak staff, this is where you're going to find the shiny charm once you have a complete Pokedex and you get to battle Morimoto. I honestly love this little inclusion of an Easter egg into the game. I love that the staff are part of the Pokemon world. When is Birdkeeper Toby gonna be? I don't know. One day. Number 2, and this one comes with a little Pokemon theory. Kabu is from Hoenn. There are only 2 places where you can find this information, either from a child who lives in the same city, Motorstoke, who happens to mention that he was the shining star that came in from the Hoenn region. And of course, on his league card, you can find out that he came from the Hoenn region. And that's really interesting to me. Why would they mention that? Well, he's an old man and a fire expert, and there is actually a fire type expert, presumed fire type, who used to run the Laveridge Town Gym in Hoenn, and that's in fact Flannery's grandfather. So the theory is, could they be the same character? Flannery's grandfather was not only a gym leader, I believe he was an Elite Four member at one time, and that's why Flannery has kind of confidence issues. He's got a lot to live up to. And when you look at Kabu's league card, you learn a little bit about him, and that he too, he has also had confidence issues and been knocked down from the major leagues to the minor leagues. But after good battles, he's kind of found his way back up. Kabu is, by the way, one of my favorite gym leaders. He really reminds me of the Sword Master and the Fire Master from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Anyway, the point is, Kabu's from Hoenn. Is he Flannery's grandfather? I don't think there's enough evidence there, but maybe you want to make that Pokemon theory. Good luck to you. But I do find it super interesting. And number 1, the appearance of Type Null in the game. Okay, this is something we should definitely be talking about, right? I mean, in the world of Alola, where Type Null appeared, there were only 3 in existence. One of them belongs to Gladion, one of them goes to the player character, and the other one, we don't know what happened to them. Just that there was a 3rd Type Null. However, in Pokemon Sword and Shield, the only legendaries to appear in the game are Zacian, Zamazenta, Eternatus, and then Type Null and Silvally, because yeah, they're legendary Pokemon. Why are they here? They're just given to you by a random trainer who is in the battle tower, and the Pokedex entry says that now new instances of this Pokemon exist, so clearly it has become a much more common Pokemon. But still, rare enough you're given it as a gift. It doesn't exist in like the wild area for some reason. With that in mind, is Type Null still even a legendary Pokemon? I don't know. But the fact that it's here in Galar certainly had me thinking, oh, maybe this was in fact the 3rd one. Just because there are new instances of the Pokemon doesn't mean that this one you're being given is a new instance of the Pokemon. Just then you've got to work out what the relationship is between the Aether Foundation and Macrocosmos, who made the Battle Town. But anyway, those are just my 10 kind of little missable things that are in the world of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Let's get on with the 10 more hidden secrets and Easter eggs in the world of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Okay, so number 1, the first kind of missable detail that I've come across. This one is very much theory bait, and I will be doing a Pokemon theory all about this. Have you ever wondered why the statue in Stow-on-Tide, I believe it is the place, I keep on wanting to say Stoke-on-Trent because that's a real place in the UK, and all the names are very, very similar, but Stow-on-Tide, there is the statue of Zacian, Zamazenta, and the 2 kings. And it seems to have been buried away behind this wall so no one would find it. On top of that, in the city of Circhester, there is the banner, the hidden part of the history of Galar, which also shows the 2 heroes. And you might be wondering, why are these 2 parts of Galar's history being hidden from the world? What is it that they have in common? Well, you might notice that they both have imagery of the shrine. The shrine that is found in Slumbering Weld, where the rusted sword and old shield can be found. The shrine where ultimately you encounter Zacian and Zamazenta. So it seems to be the case, the thing the story is implying, the subtext that's going on there, is that maybe in order to keep these Pokemon a secret, or in order to hide the true nature of what happened on the darkest day, the reason it's all being hidden is because of the imagery of that shrine. Okay, number 2. That one wasn't so much an Easter egg so much as it's just a missable detail. You want an Easter egg? I'll give you one. In the city of Spikemuth, there are lots of posters lining the walls of the city, but one in particular is of a lady wearing a green bikini with green hair. And this is a reference to the original swimmer class from Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Well, yeah, that was the design of the character. That's a pretty old kind of like little Easter egg, but I really appreciate it. So, number 3, I believe it's either in Circhester or Motorstoke, but I'm going to say Motorstoke. In the upstairs of the hotel, you can enter a room and find a little very interesting cutscene, in which, Cluedo style, there is a character who has lined up a number of other NPCs. This character declares that there has been a crime, a murder. Okay, not a murder, but he believes his berry has been stolen, eaten even. And there is this whole kind of very, very Cluedo-esque Sherlock Holmes style deduction where he works out who exactly it was that ate his berry. This might be a reference to Sherlock Holmes, but even if it isn't, there's another reference. It's kind of a part B to this one, that in the town of Hillbury, there is someone who mentions that there was a Pokemon who was a great detective, which of course is a reference to Detective Pikachu, who is in himself a reference to Sherlock Holmes. See by the little hat. So there you go, double whammy, we still get our Sherlock Holmes reference in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Next up, number 4, another one of those kind of missable detail type deals. Did you know that Pokemon can now evolve at level 100? Throughout the whole franchise, if you get your Magikarp to level 100, you're not evolving it into a Gyarados, which honestly, I think is kind of funny. But now the item, the rare candy, has a secondary effect. If the Pokemon is level 100, it won't go to level 101, obviously, but it will now evolve an unevolved Pokemon, which, again, pretty cool. Number 5, let's talk about shirts. And actually, before I get a little bit further into this one, I made a mistake in my last video. The last top 10 hidden secrets, Easter eggs, references, missable details, that video, I mentioned that in the town of Circhester, there were 2 shirts, an Eevee one and a Pikachu one, and they were named incorrectly. But I was wrong about that, because if you actually buy the shirt and wear it, turns out the other Pokemon is on the back of the shirt. So I was wrong about that. However, here's one for you. There is a shirt that never made it into the game. There was a competition held by the Pokemon Company for graphic designers, graphic artists to submit their designs to be on a shirt, on a bit of apparel in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and they'd win some money. This really cool Gyarados / Magikarp design was submitted. I don't know the artist right now. One moment. No, I can't find the name, but this design is really cool. So why didn't it get into the game? Well, it turns out it was against competition rules to submit a design that you had already used elsewhere online. It was a self-plagiarism situation, and the person who won the competition, their design had already been online, it had been out there, they had already posted it elsewhere. So they lost the prize, and ultimately their shirt wasn't put into the game. Okay, number 6, did you know that Chairman Rose, his origins are not as a business tycoon, but actually as a construction worker, as a miner? He came up through the very workforce of Galar. This can be seen in 2 different situations. Number 1, after you complete the game, if you visit Elena, who's in one of the mines of Galar, not sure why she's there, or Eliana, I don't always pronounce her name very well. Anyway, she gives you Chairman Rose's card, and she says that Chairman Rose, yeah, he used to be a construction worker, or I keep on saying construction worker, he used to be a miner, he used to be part of Galar's workforce before he was kind of, you know, the big business tycoon. But this can also be seen because in Hillbury, you see one of these characters, one of these miners, and they have the Pokemon Kufan, which is a Steel-type Pokemon. There's a lot of Steel-type Pokemon are found in the mines, but specifically Kufan and its evolution, Copperajah, this is the signature Pokemon of Chairman Rose. I can't help but feel like Chairman Rose is supposed to be the in-game like equivalent, like they've creatively taken Lord Alan Sugar, who's kind of our guy who runs The Apprentice. I can't help but feel like this is basically supposed to be a younger Lord Alan Sugar. Kind of business tycoon of the Galar region, making smart investments, hiring people, firing people. I don't know, I just feel like that might also be a little reference, but not so sure about that. Number 7, there is a room that you cannot enter. They do this with every single Pokemon game, okay? Right, back in Generation 6, one of the big things about Kalos, one of the big missed opportunities was the power plant that you couldn't enter. Then in Generation 7, in Alola, there was another power plant that again, you couldn't reach, you couldn't get to. You could take a little photo of it through your Poryphone, not your Poryphone, that's Pokemon Masters, through your Porygon Snap, Pokemon Snap. Oh, they've got so many different names. I love Pokemon, but even I can't keep up with all of these different things. The Rotom Dex! It's at the electrical power plant, you can't get in, and once again, it's even part of the story. Here in the Galar region, you see Olivia on the route left of Motorstoke, and there is a power plant in the distance which you cannot access, you cannot get to, and that's not the only room in the game you cannot enter. When you are in the final part of the game and you are in the Pokemon League, there is a room in the kind of holding area, in the waiting area before matches, that says the guy who's in the way, he's a Macrocosmos member, and he says that only authorized personnel can enter, which obviously you're not. Okay, great, I'll beat the league and I'll come back here and then I'll be able to enter. No, you never enter this room ever again, even in the rematches. You have no way to find out what is in that room. Pokemon, why are you teasing me like this? Okay, next up on this list, we have the fact that Sonia is an amazing artist. Her art, well, it can be seen when she's a Pokemon professor in the lab, but it can also be seen in her room. She's done sketches of a number of Pokemon. I wonder if she'd get on with Tracy's sketching. Anyway, the thing is, with all the Pokemon she's drawn, they're all from the Galar region, apart from one. In her room, there's a Zubat drawing. We have seen Pokemon from other regions that aren't in this deck. For example, there's a Poliwag shirt. But Poliwag and Zubat, there's a couple Pokemon that aren't in these games that are kind of referenced in these games, meaning the world is still, those Pokemon still exist out there. However, maybe it means that Sonia has traveled to some of the regions where you can find Zubat to sketch it. Maybe the next region we'll visit, there'll be a cameo by Sonia. I wonder what regions have Zubat. Sinnoh? 2 more to go. This one is kind of more of a missable thing. It's a little hidden detail. There is a young girl in the town of Hilbury who will give you this whole coded message about where there is a secret hidden treasure. Personally, when I played through the game, I found this really difficult to work out what she was saying, but what she says is that you have to go and investigate the runes that are around the city in a specific order, and that specific order is grass, water, and then fire. I didn't totally re-look that up between cuts. But yeah, you do grass, water, and fire, you communicate with the runes in that order, and then you find it's sadly just an expert belt. I was kind of hoping it would be something more mysterious. And final note, and again, this is Pokemon Theory bait, final hidden reference Easter egg thing that you might not have realized. Opal's League card says that she took over the gym from her mother 70 years ago. Now this means one of 2 things. Either the Galar region's gym challenge is the oldest one that we know about in the Pokemon world, or the Galar games are set in the future. This is because the modern day Pokeball is only 40 to 50 years old in terms of like Kurt creating the modern Pokeball that is then sold by Silphco, or even Professor Oak, who is in the manga lore, said to be the person who set up the first Pokemon League and was the first champion. He's not older than 70. And as impressive as Professor Oak is, he didn't do it when he was 1. That means that either the Pokemon League in Galar has been going on for a lot longer, or the Galar games are set far in the future. I'm going to be thinking about that one a lot in terms of Pokemon theories. Okay, and with this one, Pokemon Masters, we will start off with Easter egg number 1, hopefully one you've definitely not thought about before. And this one was actually passed on to me by one of you, who's the screenshot of which I cannot find, so I'm so sorry. Thank you all for supporting the channel in that way though. Appreciate you sending me stuff that you find interesting. And that is with the new rival character of Clara. Clara is the Pokemon Sword rival. The Pokemon Shield rival is Avery, and these two are not carbon copies of each other. In fact, they have league cards and rare league cards that give a whole bunch of information, like Avery's. Avery's talks about how he's from a long family of psychic trainers who have psychic powers like teleportation, and actually he's one of the weaker ones in his family with just levitation as an option. But, and interestingly enough, Avery's league card mentions how his family have always been the psychic gym leaders of the Galar region. That might come into play a little bit later, but I want to take a look at Clara's league card. Because Clara herself is not part of a family of gym leaders. In fact, she went to train at the gym for 2 days and then basically just couldn't hack it. She's a bit lazy. She trained at the Poison Gym, of which there isn't one in Galar. In fact, the Poison Gym, there's only 2 of them in existence. There's the Fuchsia City Gym and there's the Verbank City Gym. And while Clara doesn't look like a ninja, she is noted as being a bit of a music person. She's a pop star, she sings. Which would very much tie into Roxy's musical Verbank City Gym, and in fact, 2 of Clara's Pokemon are Coughing and Venipede, which is a pretty common setup team for the trainers, the gym trainers in Verbank City Gym, which I think all but confirms that Clara is from there. So hopefully that's one you've not thought about, kind of like a mini theory. Easter egg, interesting thing number 2, this is the one that you've probably seen, right? Mustard is playing the Nintendo Switch while you're going off and doing training. And what's he playing? It's not Minecraft. Thought it might have been at first and I thought that's weird. It's not, it's Pokemon Quest, which is a game I've never played. Should I? I don't know, let me know in the comments. Cool thing, Easter egg reference number 3, Urshifu is not able to get its Gigantamax form through drinking Max Soup. It doesn't eat, or eating Max Soup. You drink soup or eat soup? Whatever, doesn't matter. Urshifu doesn't do it. Instead, Urshifu is able to transform as a result of Max Honey, coming from a tree on the Isle of Armour. Given that the next game suspected to happen, I've said it before, I'll say it again, are
Diamond and Pearl remakes.
This could work, because you might have noticed in Diamond and Pearl, assuming they're going to keep the Gigantamaxing, which you'd imagine they will, just like they kept Mega Evolution for Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire when it was introduced in X and Y. When it comes to Gigantamaxing, there are not raid dens all across the Sinnoh region. What there are honey trees, and honey trees could act as a replacement, and so I think this is a little nod to that, a little taste of honey, of what that's going to be like. Number 4, believe it or not, Kangaskhan of all Pokemon gets a double Easter egg situation. Ooh. Kangaskhan in the new Pokedex is right next to Cubone and Marowak, once again, supporting the theory. You've heard it here before a million times.
Cubone and Marowak are related to Kangaskhan.
Cubone and Marowak are related to Kangaskhan, obviously. Whether you're looking at old school theories or beta sprites or SOS calling in Pokemon Sun and Moon, where a Cubone can call upon a Kangaskhan for help, these Pokemon are absolutely related, and I think that their position in the Pokedex represents that. But if that's not enough for you, just take a look at Kangaskhan's own Pokedex entry that talks about how it has been known for even raising like a human child, which I think is a direct reference to the first time Kangaskhan show up in the animated series, looking after a human child who ended up in the care of Kangaskhan after his father dropped him out of a helicopter. Yeah, Father of the Year award. Number 5, once you complete the Isle of Armor, gym leaders from the main game will show up on the Isle, just taking a little break, relaxing with their Pokemon, and they'll be all over the island in all different weathers. There's a couple things interesting about this. Number 1, Opal doesn't show up, I guess because Bede's the new gym leader, but then Marnie and Pierce show up, despite the fact they're both the gym leader of Spikemuth. So that's kind of interesting. Also, the only characters that don't show up here from the main game who are kind of important characters are Eliana and Rose, which kind of makes sense, and then Leon. Speaking of Leon, all of these gym leaders, what I noticed in particular when talking to them, majority of them all reference Rihan. They'll talk about the sandstorms, they'll talk about the weather, they'll talk about this gym leader in particular. And Rihan always talks about Leon and how he's getting prepped for the next big match against Leon. I'm wondering if this is a reference to something, if this is a nod in the direction of Leon's story not quite being done. I mean, okay, I know I might have got some points of that theory wrong, but, I'm not giving up on the idea entirely. In fact, cool little tidbit number 6, when you take a look at Mustard's rare league card, we see that Mustard was going undefeated until the chairman at the time wanted him to win a rigged match. And again, there's been a lot of debate in the comments of my last video about Leon being evil as to whether that was a match against Leon or whether the ages match up or whether that was Chairman Rose. But interestingly, we also know about Mustard that Mustard never used Dynamax Pokemon. He never used Gigantamax Pokemon. So perhaps using Dynamax Pokemon was part of the early rigging the matches. Either way, this may all be a reference to the fact that when the games were being launched, the idea that Leon was undefeated would cause a lot of speculation that he was winning rigged matches. And just interestingly, like further tying the two together, Leon's league card number is 1. That's his special number that represents him as number 1, but Mustard's is 0, the one that comes before 1. Make of that what you will. Again, not really an Easter egg, or we're just going into theory territory a little bit here. I'm just really eager to cover the stuff that you might not have thought about. Again, continuing on with the Leon stuff, number 7. You get a choice of a Squirtle or a Bulbasaur, and you're supposed to give it your G-Max soup, right? But where's the Charmander? Well, it may well be the very Charmander that you get from Leon's room at the end of the Pokemon Sword and Shield main game. Cool little thing that you might have missed, number 8, at the end of the DLC, if you've completed your Pokedex for the Isle of Armor, you get given a crown that you can wear as part of your outfit. Frustratingly, I can't wear mine because it doesn't suit my hair, though nothing suits my hair. And as bad as it looks right now, you do not want to see it straightened. Anyway, this crown would seem to be a direct reference to the Crown Tundra, the next DLC coming out. The other gift you get, number 9, is the Mark Charm. And much like the Shiny Charm is more likely to find you a Pokemon with Shinies, this is more likely to get you a Pokemon that has marks. What are marks? Well, as far as I can tell, they're just kind of like little lines of flair that your Pokemon have when they come out of the Pokeballs that can kind of, I guess, add some personality and some dynamic to the Pokemon. And again, if the crown is referencing the upcoming Crown Tundra, could these marks be referencing something upcoming? Namely, again, the Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes, because marks are weirdly similar to seals. I do hope that if they do Diamond and Pearl remakes, the seals make a return, but it was that same thing. You send the Pokemon out of your Pokeball and you get a little bit of flair, a little bit of character with it. So I'm wondering if marks is kind of like the new version of that. I certainly hope not, because I thought seals were very cool. And 2 more to go, because I got a little bonus one for you. Number 10, as a result of being able to dig into the code and dig into the Pokedex, we've learned that there are, in fact, 2 forms of Zarude. The new mythical Pokemon that's being released with the next Pokemon movie. You've got the regular form of Zarude, and then you've got the form of Zarude that we've seen in the trailer wearing the cape. Interestingly, like I mentioned before with Leon and Mustard's league numbers, this Zarude, the cape, is part of a material that looks like it's come from someone's league outfit. And the number on it is 251, which is Celebi's Pokedex entry. And that makes sense because Celebi is the other key feature mythical Pokemon in the film. But if this material came from a Pokemon Gym League challenge person with this number and this color, that would imply that they're a psychic trainer, so maybe a relative of Avery's. I don't know, that's probably not going to pan out into any theories at all, but again, food for thought. Alright, as I promised you, an absolute bonus one. There is this cool little Diglett quest in Pokemon the Isle of Armor. Go around the island, find the Alolan Diglets, and of course once you found them all, did you follow a guide? I did as well, don't worry about it. We all did, thank you Sarah B. Once you complete it all, the grand prize at the end of it is an Alolan Diglett with 6 perfect IVs. That's actually pretty good. How did this character get hold of a 6 IV Diglett? I think the whole quest and the fact that you get given a 6 IV Diglett at the end is kind of implying that all of these Diglets are what's known as breedjects. When you are competitively breeding for a Pokemon, you end up just kind of like releasing boxes filled with Pokemon that don't have the stats that you want. Lots of 5 IV Diglets. To get a 6 IV Diglett without hyper training, you have to breed into it, and that takes a little bit of luck and chance. 150 eggs? That sounds about right. The Diglets across the island are breeding rejects. And come here for the promo. You came here for one thing and one thing only. 15 Easter eggs. And let's just jump into it. Starting up with number 1, the Reggies. Now, look, there are 2 cool little Easter eggs that are kind of tied into this. So as you all know, in the Crown Tundra, there is Regieleki and Regidrago. And yeah, I mean, they're pretty cool in and of their own right. A nice prize that you can only access if you call all 3 of the previous legendaries Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. But I got 2 little things for you here. Number 1, did you know that you can also catch Regigigas? Once you've got all 5 of the Reggies in your party, there is a special raid den that it's surrounded by a couple of black stones, and when you enter it, you will find a level 100 Regigigas, just kind of a special extra, which is really cool, sealed away at the base of the Crown Tundra. And number 2, the dungeons that these Reggies are in are actually old event dungeons. The whole thing where you have to stand on the Reggie's eye and create the pattern on the floor, these are identical to the Reggie ruins from Generation 4, which were only available if you had an event Regigigas. And they've literally just remastered these dungeons for this game, so it's a cool little Easter egg, I love it. Number 2, also shouting out Generation 4, Gen 4 remakes. Is this the warm-up or is this the confirmation that we're not going to get them? We've got a Spiritomb in the Crown Tundra. All you gotta do is go to a lone grave and it will command you to spread its words out there into the world, which effectively means make sure you're connected to the internet and speak with 50 people over online. Once you've done that, you can return to the gravestone and there will be a Spiritomb. And this is of course a reference to how you got Spiritomb in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, where once you had the odd keystone, you had to go to the underground 36 times, I believe, to speak with other people down there before it would appear in the Hollow Tower. Again, is this the training wheels? Is this the warm-up? Or is this the confirmation that we're not getting Diamond Pearl remakes? Let me know what you think in the comments. Number 3, obviously you will probably already know by now that in the Crown Tundra you can get the Swords of Justice, the legendary Swords of Justice. Sonia is for some reason researching their footprints, and once you find them all, and by the way, the reason you might have found all the footprints easily is that there's double the amount you need in the area, and that's why it's a lot easier than the Diglett hunt. But once you've got them all, you can go to this special little island in a lake, and there's a cooking pot. Cook a curry with the 3 Swords of Justice in your team, and Keldeo will appear in-game, which is the first time this mythical Pokemon has been made available in-game. You know, usually it's just a mythical Pokemon you get via event distribution, so that's awesome. This is like a 1 per copy of the DLC Keldeo that you can just get and catch. But on top of it, and this is the bit people might not know, is you can then go and visit Sonia at her lab in the mainland Gala, and she gives you
well, nothing, but there's a weird little cutscene where she's like, oh, there was a 4 Swords of Justice, cool. And then you get no reward for it from her. I guess the Keldeo is the reward. But yeah, it's pretty interesting that the Crown Tundra then affects that thing when you go back. Number 4, Peony gives you a Master Ball. And you know the only people in the Pokemon world that ever have Master Balls? I've talked about it on the channel before. It's only evil team leaders and evil team bases have them, Pokemon professors have them, and Pokemon champions have them. They're pretty much the only 3 types of people in the Pokemon world that have Master Balls. And Peony is, according to his league card, was once a champion. And I'm gonna get into that very, very soon in an upcoming video. But for that, you're gonna have to wait and see. Number 5, speaking of Peony, in the whole research area just up the front of the Dynamax lair, one of the people is like, that looks like Chairman Rose, but it's a totally different energy to Chairman Rose. And it's interesting that she mentions Chairman Rose because the Dynamax layer on the outside has these 2 big electricity pylon things, one on either side, and they're the same pylons that appear in Chairman Rose's underground lair base where he's keeping Eternatus, implying that Chairman Rose was there. This is something Chairman Rose was working on before he went to prison. So maybe Eternatus like came from the Dynamax lair or something? I gotta think about that one for future theories. Number 6, Pokemon can talk and can understand human languages, and this is proven in Calyrex possessing Peony. And this might be a reference to a couple of other legendary Pokemon. I'm pretty sure in the animated series we've seen Deoxys do this for Meowth. Mewtwo uses Nurse Joy to talk in the first movie, although Mewtwo didn't need to because it's incredibly powerful telepathically. In fact, in a whole bunch of the movies, the phrase "it's telepathy" is used. It's actually a little bit of a meme. It's either Brock or Silent or whoever is filling that role is always like, "it's telepathy," when Pokemon that shouldn't be able to talk can absolutely talk. I buy it for Calyrex, but this is actually something that I don't think we've ever seen in the games before. It's kind of a little nod reference-ish. I don't know, I just thought it was cool, but it kind of reminds me of those old movies. 7, there's a Cosmog that you can get in the Crown Tundra. You just enter one of the houses in Freezington, I believe is the name of the village, and you go in and there's a Cosmog named Foofy, which might be a reference to the fact that in Sun and Moon, the main Cosmog is known as Nebby, and I expect from this point forward, all Cosmogs will have nicknames. We've got Nebby and we've got Foofy. Which gang are you part of? I think I'm feeling, I don't really think about this. I'm feeling Foofy gang. Like Nebby just never gets in the bag. Number 7, once you complete the Crown Tundra and you get hold of a bunch of the Reggies, you can go to Winden Stadium, and there's an old gentleman there who I believe is the very same gentleman who gives you the card in the Crown Tundra for your fashion, and it'll give you access to more outfits. Also, speaking of outfits, we get new like glasses and eyewear that belongs to Team Flare and that belongs to Team Plasma, like the Getsis eye patch thing. That's what these bits of clothing are references to, if you were wondering. What they're doing in Gala, who knows? Is this Getsis' actual eye patch? I doubt it. Will I likely use it as evidence in some ridiculous theory at some point? Almost definitely. Number 9, this isn't something that's an Easter egg or a reference, it's just something that I find really, really cool. The Pokedex entries for some of the fossil Pokemon, they've really been updated. Like, check this out. The Gen 1 fossils have such a range on them. According to its Pokedex entry, Kabuto, this Pokemon is almost entirely extinct. So does that mean that living Kabuto are around from hundreds of thousands of years ago? There are so many wild fossil Pokemon in the Crown Tundra. Here, let's look at Omanyte. Because some Omanyte managed to escape after being restored, they've been released into the population by people. This species is now becoming a problem. So Omanyte definitely did go extinct. Kabuto maybe not, but now the resurrection of these Omanyte fossils are out there in the wild being pests. Aerodactyls is even wilder. This is a ferocious Pokemon from ancient times. Apparently even modern technology is incapable of creating a perfect specimen. Meaning that maybe with all of these fossil Pokemon, this is just not quite how they looked in the past, or maybe a perfect Aerodactyl is like, I don't know, slightly different. This just gives us such a range on fossil Pokemon, and I love the Crown Tundra because it's the only place, as far as I can see, in the whole of the Pokemon world where fossil Pokemon just roam and are about. This could be a reference maybe to, like, in Alola, there's someone who's like, I want to make a Jurassic Park, and this is that. Okay, a super quick one. Number 11, Avery and Clara's team has been updated to now include Galarian Slowking. It's interesting, I always expected one to have Slowbro and one to have Slowking, but yeah, I guess they both have Slowking now. Number 12, this is one of my
favorites, Sonia has absolutely been to the Crown Tundra before. Not only is it referenced in the Isle of Armor that she's gone somewhere snowy by Hop, but also in her bedroom at the very beginning of the game, you can see artwork of Zubat that she's drawn. She's quite an artist. And Zubat can only be found in the Crown Tundra, so I reckon she's been there before. 13, this is a really cool one. I gotta get my little notebook up for this. So when you look at the map of the Galar region, something's always interested me. You've got areas like Axu's Eye and the Giant's Mirror, and you think, was there an actual Axu that this is named after? And what about an actual giant? The Regis are referred to as giants in this, and with this in mind, now with the Crown Tundra, we have the full map of Galar. And we can see that in the Galar region, at the very bottom of the region, we've got the giant's foot and the giant's bed. Above it, we've got the giant's seat. Above that, we've got the giant's mirror, and above that, we have the giant's cap. This suggests to me that if you look at the whole of the Galar region from the top to the bottom, the cap is the head, the mirror is the face, the seat is the bottom, the butt, and that the bed and the foot are just the two different feet of the Pokemon. Maybe this is supposed to resemble Regigigas somehow, but it's loose. Regigigas is healed, I believe, in the giant's bed, so maybe the bed is referred to as the bed because that's where Regigigas is at, and that the whole Galar region is one big Regigigas. Heck, we know for a fact that Regigigas used to move continents. We know this from the Pokedex, so maybe it moved Galar at some point, hence why it's sealed down there. Again, theory bait. Number 14, when you complete the Galar Star Tournament, you get this image of Leon saying that he runs the Pokemon League now. He's taken over from the chairman, which really heavily ties into my Leon is evil video, and he was just like vying for power, taking over from the chairman. But he was never a good champion and always winning rigged matches, and here we see further confirmation, because if you finish 15 battles of the Galar League tournament, you get a cutscene with Swordsbutt and Shieldbutt saying that they pay for the whole thing. They're funding the Galar Star tournament. And interestingly enough, when Swordsbutt and Shieldbutt came around in the post-game of Sword and Shield, Leon was like nowhere to be seen till the very end when he seemed to be in cohorts with them. I am at the point where it's fully in my headcanon. I genuinely believe that Leon is in the subplot of Sword and Shield as the real big band behind everything. Number 14, you know that big mystical tree in the Crown Tundra that the legendary birds are all like going for? They're all after the fruit, and it's a really like, wow, what's the mystery behind that tree? Go and push on it, and then shake on it again, and then shake on it again, and then shake on it again. And all there is in there is a Dynamax Greedent, which is kind of paralleling the Vespiquen from the Isle of Armor. You do get, though, if you can beat it, a ton of berries. I just wish the mystery around this tree was a little bit cooler. And finally, number 15, if you haven't seen them already, the shiny forms of the legendary birds, Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno, are the regular colors of those Pokemon, implying that maybe these Pokemon came first and evolved into them. I don't know, you'll have to watch my evolution tree video for that.
And then off with number one that I think is absolutely wild and I didn't even know about myself until looking up for this video. Did you know, starting in Generation 2 with Pokemon Crystal, and it only happened again in Generation 3? In Generation 2, if you leveled up a Pokemon in the location where you met it and caught it, it would actually gain extra happiness and extra friendship, which is really cool. I don't know why they didn't keep that. Just a nice little tidbit one, that. Number 2, the Sage or Monk trainer class was edited outside of Japan. It was censored to not be holding prayer beads, and this happened both in the original sprite and in the Heart Gold Soul Silver sprite, and this is probably just due to the religious nature of prayer beads. This is actually not totally weird, and number 3, they also do it for sexy reasons. This time with the Swimmer or Beauty sprite. The Beauty sprite has been edited to have a much longer skirt. The Swimmer sprites have been edited to, you know, not have a wink as it happens. Interestingly, as I mentioned in my Pokemon Sword and Shield hidden Easter eggs video number 2, the Swimmer trainer class, the one that naughtily winks at you if you're not in playing Pokemon in the West, well, that trainer class is actually on a poster in Spikemouth. I cannot tell if it is the winking one or the non-winking one. Number 4, in Pokemon Crystal on the Virtual Console specifically, when you complete the game, there is a Celebi event involving a GS ball. This is not in the original Pokemon Crystal, but it's not plucked out of nowhere. In fact, it is in the, well, there is a similar event in the Japanese version of Pokemon Crystal, in an event that required you to link up with your cell phone at the time. Your mobile phone, which back in those days, I mean, in Nokia 3210, this is what I was on at that time. Actually, that's a lie. I didn't even have a phone at that time. I don't even know what the phones of that generation were, but it's a long time ago, and it was exclusively in Japan. So yeah, I'm glad they made it a bit more accessible. Speaking of hidden events, number 5, Heart Gold and Soul Silver are littered with inaccessible events now. Of course, back in the day, if you went to the local, I guess it was your local game store or your GameStop or wherever, you could access these events when they were public. And I know there are ways you can access the events now, but there's one, for example, where you would time travel with Celebi, and you go meet Giovanni chatting with his son Silver and confirming that Giovanni is Silver's father, and then you would battle Giovanni, this happening at the same time that you, the player character, are invading Goldenrod Tower to stop Team Rocket. And in fact, there's an even cooler event if you transfer over the Hall of Origin Arceus from Pokemon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, where you watch this really bizarre cutscene that kind of confirms that Pokemon is set in a universe that is self-aware that it is a video game. That's a whole other theory that I've talked about on the channel before, where you see flashing images of the real world, and your Arceus creates an egg with a Dialga, Palkia or Giratina in it at level 1. It's pretty wild, and those aren't even the only events. Like, there's another event where if you got a shiny Suicune, Entei, or Raikou from the event to do with the 13th Pokemon movie, the Zoroark and the Master of Illusions movie, and transfer specifically that Raikou, Entei, or Suicune to Pokemon Black or White, you would be able to enter Lost Thorn Forest and catch the Zoroark, but only once. Yeah, Heart Gold Soul Silver really was a really good time to be a Pokemon fan. There was a lot going on. And number 6, as part of those very events, there is a Pokemon you cannot transfer up, and I believe it's the first Pokemon that you can't transfer up from a past generation. I mean, okay, you couldn't trade any Pokemon from the original Gold, Silver, Crystal to Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but from that point onwards, everything is transferable up to the modern day games. You can get stuff right back from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, there is one Pokemon that you can't, and that is the special event Notch-Eared Pichu. Only available as, again, part of an event to do with that very same movie. The Notch-Eared Pichu, just it's abandoned. It's lost in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and it's very sad, because I really think the Notch-Eared Pichu is quite cute. Number 7, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver came with an application called the Pokewalker, which is kind of like a sequel to the Game Boy Mini, or the Game Boy Pocket, one of those, and then kind of has later become the Pokemon Go Plus. In this little Pokewalker are a whole bunch of levels that you can transfer your Pokemon from Heart Gold and Soul Silver to, you can catch new Pokemon here, and there are special event courses that are locked away, including the Nighttime's Edge course, which was only available if you transferred a Jirachi to this. Now, in current day, apart from hacking your games, there is only one legitimate way to now get a Jirachi onto this Pokewalker, and that is, if you're in the UK and Europe, to use the game Pokemon Channel to get the Jirachi for playing the game and completing it, and transferring it up, and then putting it onto this, and you can still unlock the course. There's nothing special on there, just a Jigglypuff and a Clefairy, but it's still pretty interesting. Or if you're elsewhere in the world, I believe there is a Pokemon Colosseum bonus disc that allows you to do this. Number 8, to save space in Pokemon Gold and Silver, the intro screen that features the Sea of Lugia and the Sky of Ho-Oh are the same screen pretty much, just flipped. The cloud assets and the wave assets are the exact same thing, just with different color tones to represent day and night. So yeah, that's neat little fact, can't unsee that now. Number 9, the games Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are the only games where you can legitimately get 2 matching Spinder as like a guaranteed thing, other than I guess now like Pokemon Go. In fact, you can get 2 shiny matching Spinder, which should, you know, technically be mathematically not impossible, but like phenomenally unlikely that it would even happen in our lifetime, because there are like 8 billion different forms of Spinder if you include all the shinies. So getting 2 that are identical is pretty hard, except there's a special glitch in the game called the Cute Charm glitch, and you can read up and learn all about this. It is a glitch that requires a ton of trial and error and absolutely hours of your time to kind of learn how to get to this point in the game. But from what I can understand, some players will spawn with a secret ID and a player ID that lines up in a way that means when you have a Pokemon at the front of your party that knows Cute Charm, like Jigglypuff, that when a wild Pokemon comes out, it has a like 1 in 20 chance of being shiny, and all the Pokemon have very similar IVs and EV spreads, which means that Spinder ends up being the same. And also you have a 1 in 20 chance of getting a shiny. It's actually a real method for getting shiny Pokemon, and it is something that can be done with a lot of research and a little bit of learning and just working out how much of the exploit you want to do legitimately, which I would recommend any of you hardcore shiny hunters out there maybe look into it. 11, in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, there is a Team Rocket Grunt in Cerulean City who is hiding part of the power plant. It's, I think, a cog from a machine, the power plant part, and he's hiding it, which is obviously a frustrating thing that you have to deal with before you can continue in your Kanto part of the Johto adventure. Kanto part of the Johto adventure. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, he speaks in a very peculiar way where he's like, I gotta go. He's the go rocket trainer. And the same Rocket Grunt reappears in the Unova games, all settled down in one of the houses that is only accessible in the winter. Which actually, seeing this character settle down and having had a kid is about the only thing in the Unova games that leads to any sense of a timeline. Not that the Pokemon timeline isn't already completely frazzled and wild, but it is the only thing that gives a notion between where Generation 2 ends and where Generation 5 games pick up. Somewhere within this guy's lifetime, he is one of the only connecting features, other than, I guess, the World Championships, although it could be argued that they're holograms, but that is a theory, not an Easter egg. Number 12, in Celadon City and Pokemon Crystal only, there is some graffiti on some wall, and you can add a mustache. I don't know why they added this, but they did. Number 13, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal introduced a bunch of really interesting and unique items, including a silver leaf and a gold leaf, which you could sell for money, and one item of particular interest is the Berserk gene. An item found outside of Cerulean Cave that raises the stats of Pokemon but makes them confused. And I think this is a direct reference to, of course, Mewtwo, which is the cave, Cerulean Cave is where you find Mewtwo. It's the Berserk gene, and it is a Pokemon with quite aggressive modifications to its original DNA. And in fact, the Berserk gene is essentially what the Mewtwo is producing in the Detective Pikachu movie, where all the Pokemon get a little bit stronger, but they kind of get all confused. And go berserk. So I always found that really, really interesting. Number 13, in the beta version of Pokemon Gold and Silver, Lake of Rage was originally the home of the 7th gym. There used to be a town there. And interestingly, Gyarados' Pokedex entries, and in fact it was kind of in the Alola arc, as late as that, they mentioned that rampaging Gyarados were once said to destroy a whole town. Now, I don't know if it's part of Pokemon lore or whether that's just a light Pokemon theory of mine, but what if Mahogany Town actually did used to be where the Lake of Rage is? I mean, you can find a house or two there, and the Lake of Rage is essentially a crater that was said to be filled up by water by rampaging Gyarados. I kind of like the idea that maybe that Lake of Rage town used to actually be part of Pokemon lore. But either way, just the fact that that used to be a town is kind of a little hidden secret that you should know, but I kind of like the theory, and that's why I mentioned it. And number 14, speaking of beta Pokemon, Pokemon that we haven't seen appear until much later were actually originally programmed to be in the beta of Pokemon Gold and Silver seen in the Space World demo. This was a very early demo of Gold and Silver that was shown off to people, and I guess it was a gaming expo, where we see beta designs for Pokemon that were eventually reused for the likes of Popplio and Tangrowth. And in fact, we saw a whole bunch of Gold and Silver beta Pokemon. I mean, on the front cover of this magazine, there is a Pokemon that very clearly became the spawning point for what we now know as Tirtuga and possibly also Dreadnought. I'll leave a link below to where you find out more about all of these Pokemon. I find it super, super fascinating. And finally, number 20, Surfing Pikachu has always been a pretty big theme hidden within the world of Pokemon. Pokemon Yellow had a Surfing Pikachu minigame. In fact, Surfing Pikachu is a prize in the Unova games for doing the Surfing Mantine challenges. And in fact, Pokemon Crystal has a very special egg called the Odd Egg that has a 1 in 16 chance of being a shiny Pokemon. And all of the baby Pokemon that you can get in this egg, it could be any number of like Smoochum, Tyrogue, Magby, Elekid, or Pichu, all of them know a different special move. Pichu's, of course, is Surf. However, the weird thing about this is all of these special moves that can only be attained through the Odd Egg, even if you're playing Virtual Console Gold, Silver, and Crystal, if you want to trade them up to Pokemon Bank, you have to delete this move. I don't know why they didn't fix this in the programming or change it, but it is absolutely bizarre to me, and yeah, that's a thing. Also, bonus Easter egg like number 16, Birdkeeper Toby can be found in Johto. So, there you go. It's a nice little one from me. In fact, my little phrase, "Soar high, Pokemon Masters," comes from Birdkeeper Toby in the game saying, "Fly high, my bird Pokemon." Except I wasn't going to tell you to fly high, I just thought that was kind of weird. Wasn't going to choose that as a channel outro. Anyway, if you do want to see more of... Starting off with number one and one of my absolute favorites, the Spearows on the bridge at the very beginning of the game. At the beginning of the game, the main character walks to the first area where Tapu Koko appears. You walk up the trail and you see 3 Spearow attacking Cosmog, and you run over to it on the bridge, and the main character kind of bends over it, protecting Cosmog. Cosmog unleashes a big blast of power to kind of get rid of the Fearow, and actually I think then Tapu Koko swoops in to save you. Ultimately, all of this is one big reference to the first episode of the Pokemon animated series, in which Ash Ketchum and Pikachu are getting attacked by a flock of Spearow, and it looks like it's game over for Pikachu. Ash is standing in front of him, body blocking the attacks, and then Pikachu lets out a big burst of electrical power to save the day. Number 2, we have Professor Burnett, and anyone who is familiar with the games will know what this Easter egg is right off the bat. Because Professor Burnett, really cool character, wife of Professor Kukui, and I think they're having a kid together at the end of the animated series, very cute. But her first appearance was long before Professor Kukui, not in the Alola region, but in fact in a Unova game.
Do I have my Nintendo DS? My Nintendo DS.
How many of you remember the Pokemon Dream Radar game on the 3DS, where you can find the Therian forms of Landorus, Tornadus, and Thundurus? This is it, and that is Professor Burnett. Look, here's a little side-by-side, and as you can see, they're the same character. And of course, in the Alola games, she studies alternate dimensions, which is where the Dream Radar game is set, in the Dream World. Number 3, in the Marley City Gardens, there is a golden bridge. Now, there's a whole bunch of different connotations here. Marley City, for example, is inspired by the architecture of like Johto and Kanto, and the golden bridge is a direct reference to the Nugget Bridge from the Generation 1 games. This is the bridge in Cerulean City, at the end of which you will battle a Team Rocket Grunt and get given a nugget. Actually, I think the nugget is from the trainers who come after the bridge, but it's just called the Nugget Bridge. Ultimately, though, the Team Rocket Grunt gets referenced because after you've left the area and gone back into it for the second time, you'll find a trainer at the very end of it after a streak of trainers called Veteran Dom, who will reference Team Rocket. He's got Team Rocket style Pokemon with an Ekans, and very specifically, he'll be like,
I wonder what old Giovanni's up to these days.
Despite the fact that Giovanni shows up later with Team Rainbow Rocket. Heck, they might have been doing some foreshadowing. But specifically, he's called Veteran Don. A Don, as in the leader of a mafia, like Team Rocket is, with Giovanni at its head. Number 4, this is a really, really weird one. So, on the Ula Ula Island, on one of the beaches, there is a washed up bottle with a note inside it. That note will direct you to a trainer in Marley City. And that trainer will reference the fact that the note is from their friend, a trainer at the Viridian City Gym called Arabella. And there is, sure enough, in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, an Arabella who's at the Viridian City Gym. And this trainer has a Stantler and a Tauros. What does that mean? I honestly, nothing. It's just a weird little bit of side detail. In fact, Arabella didn't even reappear in the Viridian Gym in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, so it's a really weird, obscure reference. Number 5, I've done a whole theory about this. Okay, so the trial captain, Ilmia, I hope I'm saying the name right. I never was sure on it. Well, Ilmia is an interesting one. The normal type trial captain, Ilmia uses primarily their main Pokemon, a Smeargle, which, okay, in itself, not that interesting, but Ilmia is a lover of art, and in fact, if you go into their house in the Kalos region, you'll notice on the wall, there's artwork that references the Kalos region with its beautiful landscapes and its beautiful scenery. I think you can even get given the Shallow Sable, which is a food item from Kalos, in his house. Kind of an odd connection. What's that about? Well, on the island of Alola, there is a fairy type trial captain, Mina, one of my favorite designs in Pokemon with the paintbrush hair. I just think it looks great. And Mina is an artiste, and specifically when she appears in the Sun and Moon games, she references Elmia, and she's like, I wonder what that boy did for his trial captain, for his trial. She's curious, she's thinking about him. Why is that? Well, all of the artist trainer class from the Kalos region, they all use just one Pokemon. That Pokemon, you guessed it, is Smeargle. It would seem to be the case that both of these characters met each other beforehand in the Kalos region, and that this Smeargle is probably a gift from Mina to Ilmia. Why this gift is given, who's to say for sure, but it's one of the most popular theories on my channel, actually. I will leave a link to it, card, button, all that jazz. Right, speaking of my Pokemon theories, let's take a look at Olympia and Acerola, and I wonder what's with they both do the same
They both do the same thing in their character arts. It is interesting that these characters look similar. First of all, Olympia and her whole Pokemon gym is the biggest reference from the Pokemon XYZ days. From the Pokemon X and Y days that reference Pokemon Sun and Moon. It's the biggest reference. Her whole gym in the animated series is a giant observatory. Her psychic Pokemon specifically, I think she uses Solrock and Lunatone. There is this big focus on psychic Pokemon and psychic energy. Her town has a giant sundial thing. There's a reference in Anastar City to moon dials as well. Sun and moon, Olympia is screaming in the age of X and Y. And it's interesting how she and her followers in her gym are dressed, kind of like they're part of this tribe of worshippers of the sun and moon. And that's where Acerola comes in. See, on the island that Acerola is a trial champion of, she says that she used to come from a royal family, a lineage that lived on the island. I think they lived in Po Town, before Po Town kind of got all mangled up and destroyed, and they had to move all of these books and ancient texts to the Marley City Library. Nowadays, there isn't royalty in the Alola region, but she is part of that royal lineage. And sure enough, on her island, there is the Lake of Sun and or Moon, depending on what version you're playing, a giant place of worship to Solgaleo or Lunala, a place I believe described in the books in the Marley City Library as a place of a battle between Solgaleo, Lunala, and the Island Guardians. My belief is that this royal lineage, after the first appearance of Solgaleo, Lunala in the Alola region, worshipped those Pokemon of the sun, moon, the Pokemon of the stars, and that is where Olympia's design choices and fashion and gym have all come from. And that yes, she is a relative of Acerola's, and again, that's why they kind of look, similar with their hand poses, things, Okay, I'm getting really hot under these studio lights, so I'm going to try and race through now. Number 7, the GS Ball is mentioned canonically for like the first time, maybe ever in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and it is finally confirmed to be the greatest Smith's Ball. The first time that is since like the Johto game and the Johto animated series. Speaking of which, we got Pokemon Crystal Virtual Console with the GS Ball the next year after USUM, so maybe a little bit of foreshadowing. Number 8, as I mentioned earlier, Marley City is very cleared by the influence and inspiration of like the Johto region. You can see that by the tower in the garden, but there are even people who are on that island, or maybe it's on another island, but on one of the islands there are people who say that the Alola region was founded by people who came over from Johto and Kanto on their Pokemon. Number 8, in the Blush Mountain power plant, there is a reference to a gym leader who helped build the geothermal power plant using Pokemon that could detect heat, and I believe this is a reference to Clay and his Krokorok, because Krokorok, even when their eyes are closed, they dig and navigate using heat. Bit of a loose one, but it's either him or like Blaine, for example. Number 10, there is a famous Pikachu in these games. Why is this Pikachu famous? Well, it could be because it's literally Ash's Pikachu. Ash's Pikachu, after all, appears in Mimikyu's room as a Pokemon that Mimikyu is jealous of, so the Pokemon TV show seems to exist in this world. Additionally, Ash Greninja is in the game, so perhaps Ash Greninja is another movie star. But yeah, this Pikachu is famous. It's either that, or maybe it's the Pikachu from Detective Pikachu, or Smash Bros for all we know. But yeah, it's one of those famous Pikachus for sure. Probably the Ash Pikachu though. Number 11, in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, we get the Rainbow Rocket episode in which Giovanni and all of the other team leaders use Master Balls to carry their legendary Pokemon. And this is because Giovanni has come from a timeline where he was a success, meaning he stole the blueprints for the Master Ball. And clearly the way that he helped make all of those other team leaders successful is that he just showed up in their timelines and said, here, have a Master Ball, catch your legend Pokemon. Number 12, Alolan Executor, Marowak, and Raichu are all references to past games and past things in Pokemon. While a lot of the Alolan forms are just that, they're Alolan variations, these ones specifically take root elsewhere. For example, Alolan Marowak being a ghost type is a reference to Cubone's mother in the first games. Alolan Executor is a reference to the box art from, I believe, Jungle? It's either Jungle or the Southern Islands that saw some artwork in Japan of Executor with a really long neck. And the Raichu, I mean, that's just a huge reference to Surfing Pikachu, a character that has appeared on the card games. There's been a Surfing Pikachu with purple eyes called Puka in the anime. Seem to possess psychic-like powers, so yeah, these are all references to past Pokemon things. Number 13, in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, there is a signed autograph of a gym leader from the region you've come from, which we already know is Kanto at the beginning of the game, and this gym badge, if you zoom in real close, you realize is Lieutenant Surge's badge. And specifically, finally, in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Lieutenant Surge signs the badge, maybe suggesting that he was never really a soldier, and actually, the Pokemon War is all theatrics, and he's an actor. Or maybe Lieutenant Surge is really the main character's father, and that's why the mum has a Raichu surfboard. That makes a lot of sense. Number 14, in the Pokemon Trainer School, I believe it is, or it's in the Marley City Library, it's one of these places, there is a book. And that book tells the story of a Slowpoke, Pikachu, and Pyukumuku and how they're setting off on their Alolan adventure. It's nice, it's sweet, it's lovely, until you go to Luzamine's lab at the end of the game and see these 3 Pokemon frozen in ice. What's even worse is you can see these 3 in the Pikachu Park earlier on in the game, which means this is recent.
Oh no.
And finally, number 15, kind of a bonus, kind of off the wall one here for you. Alola introduced Z moves, which caused their trainers to do all sorts of really funky poses while performing the move with their Pokemon. And in the animated series, Brock and Misty both make a return, and their Z move poses are in themselves references to the original poses of the sprites from Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Hey, Pokemon, I'm doing it by type. Right, here we go then. 15 Easter egg secrets, bits of trivia that feel very cold. Starting off with number 1, it is the holiday season. Let's talk about Delibird. Delibird, the delivery Pokemon. It's obviously incredibly festively themed, and a Delibird can be seen in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon in the Shady House. Yes, it's a shady building in Po Town filled with a nefarious Team Skull, but inside one of the chimneys, if you wait just long enough, you can see a Delibird drop down. A Delibird dropping down a chimney with a sack of presents, which is weird because you'd imagine Team Skull would be on the naughty list. Number 2, speaking about Santa Claus is canon within the world of Pokemon, specifically within the animated series. Santa Claus has been seen in both the Kanto and Johto arcs with a full arsenal of wintry themed Pokemon. He's got Jinx, who help him out at his workshop. He's got Lapras and, of course, Delibird. He has Stantler, who help him fly his sleigh, which makes a lot of sense. But back in the Kanto arc, before Stantler existed, he used Rapidash instead, which seems a little bit contradictory given that, you know, he lives in the North Pole where there's loads of ice. Just sort of feels like Rapidash would melt into the ice. Although, I suppose it explains that this one can fly, so maybe it just hovers around the North Pole. Number 3, also speaking of the animated series and special winter specials, in the 2001 Pikachu's Winter Vacation, there is an alternate form or variant of Snorlax, one of my favorite Pokemon, and it seems to be a snowman Snorlax. It's like an ice Snorlax. Snorlax can learn a bunch of ice-type moves, but thus far we have not seen this Snorlax as a regional variant anywhere. Actually, it's very possible that this Snorlax is just appearing in Pikachu's dream as well, as the whole thing seems to be happening at night from the point of view of Pikachu and other Pokemon. Number 4, something I have discovered the hard way. When playing Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, you want to be careful what time you set your clock to. This is because for a lot of the physical copies that are really old now, the internal battery might have run dry, and if that's the case, all of the clock-based events won't work. These include the events at Shoal Cave, which determines when the tide is coming in or leaving, and if you haven't set your clock to a very specific time, Snorunt won't appear. If this is the case, the only way to then go ahead and complete your Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald Pokedex with Snorunt is either to reset the game and choose the correct time at Shoal Cave, or to trade the one Shadow Snorunt that you get in Pokemon Gale of Darkness. Number 5, looking to Snorunt's evolution, Glalie, there is a very special Glalie that you can obtain in the Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire demo. I said that really strangely, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Glalie, of course, one of the new Pokemon to get a Mega Evolution and a Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. For some reason, it was paired up with Steelix, because people who got that demo in Japan got a special Steelix that could Mega Evolve, and here in the Western world, certainly where I live in England, you got a Glalie. It's an interesting demo, this one. There were sort of news reports, I remember at the time, that the longer that you played the demo, if you revisited it every day, there would be new stuff that you could get in the game to send to your main copy of Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire. I did it again, Omega Ruby and Omega Ruby. Anyway, I played that demo day after day, and I did get things like a nugget, for example, to send over to my main copy, but nothing past a certain point. Number 6! Can you tell me which game Professor Willow first appeared in? No, it wasn't Pokemon Go. This is to say that Price, according to the Poker Gear and in-game dialogue, used to be a Pokemon professor, and it turns out his middle name is Willow. And given that Willow is a type of tree and all Pokemon professors are named after trees, it would stand to reason that he was the original Professor Willow. Whether he's the same Professor Willow from Pokemon Go, that's up for you to decide in the world of Pokemon theories. Number 7, weird new Pokedex entry for Birlliant Diamond. This Pokemon's done a 180 and changed from a fire Pokemon to an ice Pokemon in the Galar region. Cool, how are we going to explain this transformation of Darumaka and Darmanitan, Pokemon that literally people use their poop to keep themselves warm? How are we going to explain that transformation to a snowman? Well, according to the Pokedex entry, its flame sac has atrophied and been replaced with an organ that produces ice, which makes a lot of sense until you read Birlliant Diamond's Zen mode form, which says that because the organ has atrophied, now it just spews fire everywhere, even causing itself to melt, which is sounds like a terrible existence for the Darmanitan. But 2, I thought that it got replaced with an ice organ, so again, this is one I might need to look into some more Pokemon biology and maybe do a Pokemon theory about. Again, this is one of the more trivia ones where it's just interesting to think about. Number 8, talking about Pokedex entries that infer a horrible existence for the Pokemon, I've been looking at Cubchoo. And I did a theory a long time ago, because Cubchoo has 2 kind of Pokedex entries that seem to be in cycle with each other. In Pokemon White, it says its nose is always running. It sniffs the snot back up because the mucus provides the raw materials for its moves. In Pokemon Black, it says when it's not feeling well, its mucus gets watery and the power of its ice moves decrease. But in Black and White 2, it says that their snot is a barometer of health. And when healthy, their snot is sticky and the power of their ice move increases. However, Cubchoo as a whole seems to be a reference to the fact that when people get cold, they get a cold. They catch a cold and become ill. It may well be the case that Cubchoo is stuck in a cycle where whenever it gets healthy, the power of its ice moves increase, but this causes its body temperature to drop as its ice moves become more powerful, thus causing it to get a cold, which means that it starts to get ill again. Which then, of course, causes its nose to become runnier, but then, according to its White Pokedex entry, its nose is always running and it sniffs the snot back up to provide power for its moves, which again then makes it stronger, making it healthier, but then when it gets healthier, it gets colder, so then it gets ill again. Poor Cubchoo. Number 9, and this is kind of a little theory I've touched on before as well. In the Alola region, people know Vulpix as another name. Kyo. This is really interesting to me because regional variation is kind of like a prelude to Pokemon that you might think would be related. Let's take, for example, Larvesta, Volcarona, Snom, and Frostmoth. These 2 evolutionary lines seem very similar, but entirely unrelated. But how much more different are they than really Vulpix and Ninetales and Alolan Vulpix and Alolan Ninetales? This whole idea of Alolan Vulpix being known by another name might be a reference to the fact that these 2 evolutionary lines have really begun to diverge and be known as even different Pokemon, which is kind of what regional variation is all about. Number 10, a little quickfire one. You can have a Mr. Rhyme that reads that it's come from the Sinnoh region. This is because while Galarian Mr. Mime can only be caught in Galar currently, Mime Jr., which can evolve into Galarian Mr. Mime in the Galar region, can be found as far back as the Sinnoh games in Diamond and Pearl. And you can't do this with any other regional evolution because, for example, an Obstagoon can only evolve from a Galarian Zigzagoon, not one from, say, the Hoenn region. So yeah, Mr. Rhyme is pretty unique in this way. Number 11, it seemed odd to me as a bird keeper professionally. The Galarian Articuno doesn't retain the ice typing, instead it's flying and psychic, but it's still known as Articuno, and according to the Pokedex entry, that would be because it gazes at people and makes them freeze in place. This using its psychic powers, of course, but again, kind of like the whole Vulpix situation with Alolan and regular Vulpix, this might be the case that Galarian Articuno and regular Articuno, where they begin to deviate is that either regular Articuno's ice powers began as psychic, freezing people still, or maybe it's sort of the other way around, where Galarian Articuno came after regular Articuno and its ice powers are what allow its psychic powers to be so solid. If that, just again, trivia, fun thing to think about. Totally said in the most coherent way possible. Number 12, the first ever Elite Four member is an Ice type Elite Four member, and that is Lorelei. But of course, in the Johto region, Lorelei was swapped out for Will. And it's interesting that Lorelei is an ice specialist, and yet she uses a Slowbro in the Kanto games. And so too does Will, because he's a psychic specialist. And he also uses Jinx. Meaning that these two characters not only share a position in the Elite Four, not only do they share Pokemon, but also, depending on what canons you're looking at, they share hair. Just something I've noticed. They share hair colors and they share hairstyles, which has led people to believe that the two might be related. Number 13, Lapras was originally depicted as having teeth, this especially in the pack art from the Fossil set. It's just one of those artworks that seems to have adapted and changed over time, as now Lapras is never really depicted in this way and appears to be a lot more of a gentle Pokemon. Number 14, similarly in Pokemon Gold and Silver, Sneasel's sprite art is entirely different to its official Ken Sugimori art, which is just bizarre. And it was fixed in Pokemon Crystal. The sprite art was given the correct colors, but before that, it was just wrong. It's just a weird little quirk. Again, fun little bits of trivia. Speaking of which, number 15, Crabominable is the Pokemon with the most letters in its name, having 12 letters in its name. But I can't pronounce Pokemon names at the best of time, and Crabominable could just do with a few less letters in its name. Thank you. And a little bonus one, because why not? It's not really Ice Pokemon themed, I mean, kind of. When Mega Evolutions started being released in X and Y and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they decided to make one of the Pokemon become kind of like a giant Christmas tree. And it wasn't Mega Abomasnow, it was Mega Sceptile's tail. Again, just things that I think are interesting and cool. So, comments. So, number 1, Tim Goodman has a Pikachu. Pikachu is in this movie. Raichu and Pichu, sadly, are not. Lucy Stevens has her partner, which is a Psyduck, and I think the fact that she's a redhead whose partner is a Psyduck is definitely supposed to be a nod to Misty and her Psyduck, who also has the same chronic headache that Lucy Psyduck has. Detective Yoshida has a Snubbull, and this is also a reference because all of the police departments in the Alola region also have Snubbull and Gramble as their mascots. The main villain, of course, Mewtwo. In the overworld, we see Bulbasaur and Venusaur, Charmander and Charizard, Squirtle and Blastoise, so all of the Kanto trio of starters. However, this is not set in the Kanto region, there'll be nods to that later. We see trainers with Rattata, Pidgeotto, Growlithe and Arcanine, Doduo and Dodrio, Gengar and Kingler, Lickitung with a very slobbery tongue who licks Tim Goodman's face. Does that count as using Lick Attack? We see a Magikarp that evolves into Gyarados and an Eevee that evolves into Flareon. The Magikarp actually evolves into a Gyarados as a result of the Rage dust thing that's in the movie. The Rage Serum, the gas. So that kind of reminds you of the Lake of Rage, where they forced Magikarp to evolve into Gyarados. So that in itself is a reference. There's trainers with Aipom, Sneasel, Octillery, Trico, Ludicolo, Slacking, and Loudred. No trainers owned a Gen 4 Pokemon, although one does appear in the film. That being a Torterra that appears as a giant Torterra. This may be a reference to the island of the giant Pokemon, as well as just being a general reference to Torterra's origins, which is the world turtle, a turtle that has a whole world on its back. From Unova, we've got Joltik, Bufalon, Ordino, Perleon, Golurk, and Rufflet. And then from Kalos, we've got Greninja and the Pancham line, including Pangoro. And while we see these Pokemon owned by Pokemon trainers, there's also a bunch of these Pokemon in the wild as well. And a bunch of other Pokemon in the wild, which helps flesh out the region of the Pokemon world. You've got some of the trainers using the same Pokemon that appear in the wild, like Pancham and Pangoro. They're owned by both trainers and in the wild. Another example of this is Rufflet. We see it in both the wild and owned by trainers. We actually also see its evolution, Braviary, owned by trainers. In the wild, there is a Jigglypuff who has both the microphone and is singing the original classic Jigglypuff song, so that in itself is an additional reference. There is Mr. Mime. There is Snorlax acting as a roadblock, again, another reference to Snorlax blocking roads. And there is wild Emolga, Morolol, Comfey, and Flabebe. Now, all of these Pokemon you may well be familiar with because they were all in the trailers, which is quite bizarre. And so while watching the film, I was looking out for Pokemon that aren't in the trailers, and I'm sad to say that I could only spot 4. The first one I saw is Graveler using its rollout attack in the underground battle sequence. There is a Togepi which is also in the underground fighting ring, and that's kind of weird to me because Togepi is like the friendliness and happiness Pokemon, so the idea that its trainer would be like an underground dodgy thug type person is kind of weird to me. Totodile appears right in the beginning of the film with Bill Nye, which is a weird thing to say. And there was a Ditto. Now, Ditto did appear in the Pokemon card game, but hadn't
appeared in any of the trailers. And Ditto is, I'm just totally sold on Ditto in this film. Ditto makes this film incredible. It keeps the Ditto face like Duplica's Ditto from the anime, and it also transforms into people, but people with that face. So with that in mind, that's another reference for the Ditto. So overall, we've got, I think it's like 53, 54 Pokemon. But now let's go for some other little references, including the reason that we know that this isn't the Kanto region. It's because in the film they mention Mewtwo having escaped from the Kanto region about 20 years ago. About 20 years ago is when Red, Blue and Yellow came out, and Mewtwo is the boss at the end of the game, so it's kind of suggesting that Kanto exists in the same world, which makes sense because in Tim Goodman's room we see a poster suggesting the Sinnoh region championships. We also see another poster that mentions the Cerulean Gym championships, and actually while we're on that scene, we get posters that show Dragonite, Hypno, Articuno, Steelix, Charizard, Reshiram and Zekrom, Rayquaza, Blastoise and Blaziken, and in the film there's a flashback scene that shows posters that have Nidoking and Feraligatr. There are a number of street signs scattered throughout the film. I've seen references to Magneton, Dugtrio, Scrafty, Jolteon, Petilil, Wooper, Victini, Agumi, Swirlix, and in one of the posters, and I'm pretty sure I saw it in the movie as well, Masquerain. In the movie, I actually also saw signs that had references to Cherubi, Togepi again, and Lunatone. Tim Goodman, of course, in the film wears shirts that have unknown on them. Multiple unknown for different times throughout the film. I'm still looking out for more unknown. I will be tonight to see if I can spell a word. The villain's lair has Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia as statues, as well looks like what looks like a Nevermelt ice, an icy stone, and possibly an old amber. In the movie, there are floats for Pikachu, Gengar, I think Blastoise was there as well, Jigglypuff, and in the movie we see Lugia. Lugia is spewing out a purple kind of gas. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if it's an actual nod, but kind of reminds me of Shadow Lugia. XD Gale, a Darkness reference? Probably not. Speaking of that gas, it's called R, and R represents both Rage, which is what it is. It's created from Mewtwo and it allows Pokemon to become really strong. It's actually kind of a reference to the Berserk gene from Pokemon Gold and Silver, a gene of Mewtwo's that allows Pokemon to become strong. But also R could be a little nod to Team Rocket, and the reason that they called it R is because of that. One of the characters that Ditto takes the form of certainly looks a little teeny tiny bit like Jessie. We see old wood carvings at the beginning of the film that depict Wooper and Slowbro, as well as Natu and Apricorns, which are used to create Pokeballs in olden days, and it is like an Egyptian carving. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, because there are so much more. Everything that is on this poster is also in the movie. And boy oh boy, there is a lot on that poster. There are references to Moo Moo Milk, the milk that Miltank produces. The Surf Shop, which is a nod to the HM for Surf and the Poke Ride ability. Unova Style Pizzas, which is a play on New York pizza. A Cycle Shop, because cycling is a common way to get around in the world of Pokemon. There is a Johto Sports Shop, a Pokemart, a Berry Juice, and signs with at least 10 different berries, and a sign for Revival Herb, Rare Candy, and sodas. A Crime Watch sign with Snubble, which is again a reference to the Pokemon Police Station. Mr. Mime's one-person mime show, which links in with the story because they I think they find Mr. Mime outside the back of his stage show. A shop that repairs shoes, and that makes a lot of sense because running shoes are very valuable in the world of Pokemon. They allow you to move a lot faster, and obviously they get very dirty, which is why a lot of people cycle. Licky Tongue's post office, the Hi-Hat Cafe, which has the Noctowl coffee sign. A Pokemon school, which kind of reminds you of the trainer school from the games. I don't know if that's a reference or not. A little advertisement for the SSN, which implies that the SSN did not sync after the events of the Generation 1 games. A Pokemon daycare, as in the daycare center where you breed Pokemon in the games. A Snap camera, which is a reference to, of course, Pokemon Snap and Todd Snap. Speaking of which, this whole movie is part of a spin-off game for Detective Pikachu, the spin-off game. When are we going to get a Pokemon Snap live-action movie? What do you reckon? I could audition for Todd Snap. I could be in that. There is Charizard's barbecues, Eevee's salons. There's an M2 on one of the dumpsters. I'm pretty sure I saw this in the film as well. M2, Mewtwo. The Rhyme City Rufflets versus the Kanto Kinglers, which again kind of pays nod to the fact that Rufflet is a wild Pokemon in the Rhyme City area. There is a little poster that has Machamp versus Primeape. This is definitely in the film. A Route 1 sign, because of course the Pokemon world is divided by routes, and a lot of missing Pokemon posters representing Pokemon like Pancham and Squirtle, which are constantly going missing in Rhyme City. I realized that earlier on, by the way, I totally forgot to mention Cubone. Cubone's in the film. It's a wild Pokemon. My bad. Other references, there's still loads to go. There is Oak's lab, or some building that has oak on it, which of course is a reference to Professor Oak. So perhaps at this point his brand, his image has expanded across the whole Pokemon world as a master researcher of Pokemon. There is an old detective movie that plays during the film. I'm not actually sure what the detective movie is. Any of you watching the film who know, let me know in the comments, but there is an old detective film playing in Tim Goodman's dad's house. Okay, big spoiler territory right here. Mewtwo in the film performs a memory wipe on Detective Pikachu. This is a nod to one of his big powers that he shows off in the Pokemon First movie, where right at the end he performs a memory wipe on all of the main characters. There is a reporter called Cynthia. I don't know whether this is really a nod to Cynthia from Generation 4, probably not, but the reporter mentions her name. There is the Squirtle Squad, which are kind of like the fire brigade of the Pokemon world. They put out fires and they're dressed as Squirtle. It's the Squirtle Squad. There is another scene where on the background we see a bunch of different Pokemon kind of appearing, and Mew is one of them. Mew is also mentioned in the film earlier when they're talking about the creation of Mewtwo. As well as the moves Rollout and Lick, which we saw earlier, we actually see a ton of Pokemon moves in this. And to top it all off and round off this video, Detective Pikachu himself is wearing a Deerstalker hat because it is representative of Sherlock Holmes. Lots of the film is shot in areas of London. You can see some signs that are clearly tube signs. London is the home of Sherlock Holmes, the great detective. Detective Pikachu is the great detective Sherlock Holmes. Also, a little side note, there are Pokemon cards in Tim Goodman's room, and I think this is really cool. It's implying that Pokemon cards exist in the world of Pokemon, which is seen once in an anime episode, but more prevalently in the Pokemon second movie, where the main villain has an ancient Mew card. It actually kind of looked like the set that was on the front of the binder was possibly the Ancient Origins set, but I couldn't really tell. But the fact that Tim Goodman has Pokemon cards, I just think is really cool. But with all that being said, that is everything that I have seen. Now, how many is that? I don't know. I haven't even been counting. But I am now about to go and see the film again, so if I spot anything new, it'll go here. And back. As you can see, I've changed. I went to the film, and yes, there were more notes. I took a notebook in and wrote on it upside down because it was in the dark and all my notes are a complete mess. But I'm going to run through the extras very, very quickly. Number 1, Lucy Stevens' dashboard has a Spoink bobblehead. You can just imagine that bouncing up and down as she's driving along in her car. At the beginning of the film, it seems that Tim works for Whismur Insurance, and I didn't know if that was a play on Whismur the Pokemon, or whether I've got that one slightly wrong. The only one I can guarantee that I didn't get all the references for is very early on in the film, he has a newspaper. There are like 3 or 4 different headlines. I could not read them all. And of course, the main central one is that the police chief, his dad, had been attacked by Mewtwo or had disappeared. Rhyme City as a whole represents a Pokemon world in which Pokemon don't fight and don't exist within Pokeballs. This seems very similar to the vision of Team Plasma in the Generation 5 games. Maybe the person who founded Rhyme City in this vision is an ex-Team Plasma member, but that might not be a reference at all. Speaking of that character is played, again, spoilers, by Bill Nye. And in his office, there also seems to be what I don't know if it's a fossil for a Kabuto or there's some kind of stone tablet that looks very Ruins of Alfie. Now this one definitely is a reference. At the beginning of the film, the first thing that Mewtwo says is, "They're outside." This is a reference to when he's in his chamber in his containment tank in the first movie, and the first thing he says is, "Those voices, they're outside where I must be." Cubone is described as being lonely, which is an exact representation of what it is because it is the lonely Pokemon. Tim's friend Jack tells him that Pokemon partners are great, and then when he was sad, he gave him a hot glass of milk. It could well be that his partner was a Miltank, again, maybe not a reference that. However, what he does say is that the Pokemon has to choose you too, which is of course representative of, saying I choose you, but also the first episode title of Pokemon, I Choose You. As Tim is going into Rhyme City, there is Pokemon music playing. It is actually the Pokemon theme song, it's just the backing track to it. The Pokemon theme song comes up again later on when Detective Pikachu starts singing it very glumly. Which, does that mean that the Pokemon TV show, the anime, is a show within the world of Detective Pikachu? It would explain why later on Detective Pikachu tries to get on Tim Goodman's shoulder and he says no and that's embarrassing. This is definitely a reference to how Ash carries Pikachu around. In early parts of the film, we do see some stone tablets. I mentioned earlier that Natu was on one, but in the same one there is Sandshrew and Geodude. When Tim first enters Rhyme City, there is a sign which has like what looks like a shoe, but the shoe has a wing and it looks kind of like a shiny Dragonair. I'm not sure if this is a shiny Dragonair or just a meaning shoes that run fast, which again, we already counted earlier. However, there is a sign for somewhere called Cut Lunch, which I assume is a reference to the HM Cut. In the police department logo is 3 stars, 2 stripes, and a Charizard. There is a sign for a meditation place which has Meditite as the mascot. And as well as that, there's a sign for a place where you get ice cream called Cut Puff Place. I assume that's a reference to Slurpuff, the puff pastry Pokemon. Lucy Stevens says that she writes blogs about the top 10 cutest Pokemon, and I personally do think this is a reference. I think it is a direct dig at Pokemon YouTubers like myself, who do our top 10 cutest Pokemon videos, and of course Lucy says, who are we kidding? They're all cute. I don't think she's met Darkrai yet. Ancient Mew appears in the newspaper and is actually referred to as Ancient Mew. I'm not counting this one as an extra one, but it's not Oak Laboratories, it's Oak Apartments. The apartments where Tim Goodman lives is Oak Apartments. Pikachu talks about how he forgot his powers when he's in the underground arena. This again may be a reference to the first movie. Mewtwo says that he's switching off the Pokemon's special abilities, and so they have to battle kind of like regular style. I do believe that in the lore of the Pokemon world there is a distinct difference between Pokemon using their powers to attack each other in battle and just like regular physical fighting. It's no longer a sport, it's more of a death match. We also see a sign that says critical hit, because that is just like the game when it tells you that you get a critical hit in battle. Pikachu says that Pokemon can actually feel what people are saying, you just have to be open to the experience, and this is again a reflection on the show, on the anime, where Ash can seem to understand Pikachu. There is a big episode about the frontier brain of the Battle Tower. Annabelle, she can understand what her Pokemon are saying. In the marketplace there are lamps that kind of look a little bit like Chandelure, and there is also a sign that says Sun, which could be a reference to Pokemon Sun. Both of these things are very loose. If they are references, they are incredibly loose references. Pikachu says Sweet Mother of Arceus, which of course is a play on the blasphemic Sweet Mother of God, because Arceus is God in the Pokemon world. There is also a screen that I mentioned Mew being on earlier. That same Mew is actually representing some of the floats that are going to appear in the parade. However, here it shows Meowth, Mankey, Squirtle, Snorlax, and Krabby, as well as again Pikachu on the screen. So earlier on I mentioned Cynthia, and I didn't count it, but now I think I am, because it turns out that Cynthia's full name in this is Cynthia McMaster. Cynthia is a master, a Pokemon master. She's the champion Cynthia. It's got to be a reference. It's not the same character, I'm sure. Just a reference. The main evil team boss has a bonsai tree in his room, which kind of makes me think, why didn't they just have bonsai? There's a lot of other Sinnoh vibes going on in that room with the Arceus and the Palkia statues. Yeah, but whether that's a reference, we'll leave it off. Okay, I gotta assume that the Greninjas that were chasing the main characters are actually Protean Greninjas. This is because the last move they use is Water Shoryuken, which makes them water. Yes, they're water anyway, but usually they're water and dark. However, they do get affected by Psyduck's Sidewave headache. So I'm gonna go ahead and say they had to be Protean, otherwise that scene just doesn't work at all. Okay, so the villains use Psychic Restraint on Mewtwo, and they look almost identical to the Psychic Restraints that appear in Pokemon, the special episode Mewtwo Returns, where Giovanni uses Special Restraints on Mewtwo. Okay, here we go. This is another bit that shows all of the different blimps in the city. I know I covered some of them before, so I'm going to try not to double count any, but Bulbasaur, Mr. Mime, Charizard, Snorlax, Pikachu, Emolga, Joltik, Mew, and Eevee all appear as floats. Speaking of Snorlax, there are some people wearing Snorlax outfits. I'm going ahead and call in it now. They are Team Snooze. Have you seen these criminals? Yes, we have. They are in this movie. We also see Pikachu go to attack Mewtwo, and Mewtwo uses Protect, so another move that I hadn't registered before. At the end of the film, there is a Sandshrew on an advertisement, and a Gengar, Jigglypuff, and again Pikachu on another screen on an ad at the end of the film. Also, the whole credit sequence is in itself a reference, with lots of Ken Sugimori classic art, including art of Lucy Stevens and Tim Goodman, and Detective Yoshida and Ryan Reynolds, which is really great. And also, just a couple of locations that we've got in mind here. These are not references, but Tatani Station is where Tim Goodman arrives, and he is leaving from Leaventown. And now, bonus round. Things friends have pointed out to me. Tanty Station is in fact a reference to Tanty Park, the first area that you visit in the Detective Pikachu video game. The Hi Hat Cafe is also not made up for the film, it also exists in the video game. References to movies include when Greninja is keeping hold of Lucy Stevens on the roof and drips down onto the floor with slobber. That is a reference to Alien. The gas being released from the balloons is a reference to Tim Burton's Batman. And in the cards, try and calm down Psyduck, Pikachu says Serenity now, which is a reference to Seinfeld. There is an image of an island that looks suspiciously like the Galar region, just saying. Also in Bill Nye's room there is an image of an Ouroboros, which is a giant serpent that eats its own tail. Just a general part of mythology in the real world. Kind of surprises me that they didn't use a dragon or serpent from the Pokemon world. I think the most accurate for this would have been Zygarde. The evil organization seem to be studying and altering Pokemon evolution. It's a pretty common theme throughout the Pokemon world, but might be a direct reference to Mega Evolution. There is a Baneri-themed cafe called Bun Buns, and there are 2 cameo appearances. One from artist Dipilo, I don't know if I'm saying that right. He plays the DJ in the underground fight scene, and Rita Ora, who did some music for the film's credits, also appears as one of the scientists. Okay, I got 3 more things for you, but they're not really references or Easter eggs. Number 1 is Kobo Soda appears absolutely everywhere in the film. It is a fictional soda made for the film. I don't know if it's a reference to anything, you can let me know in the comments. Also, Prep Manager and Premier Inn appear in the movie, and I'm just going to assume they weren't edited out properly. And also, part of the movie, part of the audio for it, was actually shot live at Pokemon Worlds. Here is a little clip of the cast of Detective Pikachu asking the audience to cheer on for either Pikachu or Charizard, and this audio was possibly used in the underground fight scene. Okay, back to real life me. And that is absolutely everything. The bits of knowledge, tidbits about Pokemon X and Y, things that I think you'll find interesting. Starting with number 1, Colress. You remember Colress, right? The Team Plasma scientist from Pokemon Black and White 2, who would then reappear in the Alola region rocking a Aether Foundation type outfit? I don't know, there's definitely a Pokemon theory there, but there's also a Pokemon theory with him in the Kalos region. Because while he doesn't appear directly, on Route 10 in Kalos there is an NPC, a hiker, who will mention that Colress, he'd spoken to Colress, and Colress speaks about how the stones on that route contain a kind of peculiar energy. This energy, of course, is Infinity Energy, a very important part to the Pokemon X and Y story with Xerneas and Yveltal, and this energy allows Pokemon to Mega Evolve. And this is interesting, because back in Pokemon Black and White 2, Colress talks in the Pokemon World Tournament about wanting to be able to bring out the power, the latent power of Pokemon hidden deep inside. Perhaps this was a little nod to Pokemon X and Y, where he had visited the Kalos region and ultimately discovered Mega Evolution. Number 2, this is the one that I expect the most of you will have heard before. That said, if you've only gotten into Pokemon recently in the last few years, since Sun and Moon came out, this might not be a thing that you're aware of. In the Kalos region, there are a number of hotels, and traveling around them is a hiker, a backpacker. And after you've spoken to them, I think in like 4 different hotels, they'll tell you how they have something to give you. It's the item, the Strange Souvenir. And this item, according to them, comes from a region that isn't Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, or Unova, or of course, Kalos, which you're in. Which of course at the time had a lot of us going, okay, so what is the Strange Souvenir? And when you look at the item description, it talks about how it's the kind of imagery of a venerated Pokemon in a region far away. Of course, this ended up being the Alola region, where the Strange Souvenir is an item, and I believe they're supposed to represent the Tapu Pokemon. But, okay, you know what? You've heard that Easter egg before. Well, how about this? That same NPC also mentions that you should visit the region and one day meet the champion of their region, because their champion is something else. Which is really weird, because I'm pretty sure that X and Y are set before the Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon games, and in those games, in the first game, there is no champion. You become the first one. And in the second game, it's your rival. How? So, is this guy like from the future? Number 3, I can't do one of these videos without mentioning the Ghost Girls. And in this game, yes, there is another one. It's a Hex Maniac trainer class. And they're just in a building in Lumio City. You take an elevator to the top and they're just sort of there chilling out. Or rather, giving you the chills. As the lights go out, then back on, then they hover around you and say, no, you're not the one. Okay? And then they just leave. Now, there is another Hex Maniac who is listening for an elevator elsewhere in Kalos. Lots of people have connected the two. I'm not sure. They are both Hex Maniacs and they're both in reference to elevators, I guess, but I don't see how the story connects here. What we do know is then again in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that same Ghost Girl can be found at Mount Pyre saying, no, you're not the one. Who are they waiting for and why? We'll never know. Number 4, some more NPC fun. There's an old couple in Kalos who are talking about celebrating wedding anniversaries, specifically the 40th and 45th, which are the Ruby and Sapphire wedding anniversaries. And of course, this is a reference to the next games in the series being Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Small, but sweet. Number 5, Professor Oak's grandson gets a reference in, I believe it's in Lumio City Pokemon Center, where an NPC will tell you that Professor Oak's grandson, that being the rival character from Red and Blue, comes into town and apparently has learnt the lingo, learnt the language of Kalos very well. And in particular, this NPC mentions that they got the word bonjour down just fine, but instead they would always opt to say, smell you later. Which of course is a common catchphrase of the rival. Interestingly enough, in Pokemon Masters, when you load up the game for the first time, while the dialogue box at the bottom says hello, and it's blue on the screen introducing you to the game, the audio in English actually says bonjour. Which, I don't know if that ties into this, but it's kind of a way that Easter egg has kind of taken on a new meaning down the line, which another one of these is going to, but I'll tell you about that at the end. Number 6! Hidden in the code of Pokemon X and Y, there are a number of Pokemon that weren't immediately accessible when the game came out. I believe both Mega Latios and Latias. Their information was in the code, as well as the 3 mythical Pokemon, including Diancie and Hooper and Volcanion as well. These Pokemon were all findable in the code, so data miners and hackers knew that they were there from the beginning, as well as 2 event forms of Vivillon and 1 other Pokemon, that being AZ's Floette. Now, we assumed that AZ's Floette would become accessible at some future point, but so far it hasn't, and we're now 2 generations down the line. Don't give up hope, because when Sun and Moon came out, we also had the original colour of Magearna, and that had the same thing happen, and it's only just become available with Pokemon Home. In my mind, we're probably going to get AZ's Floette as a regional variant of the Floette line, possibly in Sinnoh in the Sinnoh remakes, I am speculating. But yeah, I'm just saying, if that happens, I totally called it here first. Number 7, Pokemon X and Y has started a trend that has frustrated me. Working backwards, in the Galar region, as part of the story, very early on in the game, you are able to see at a distance one of Chairman Rose's kind of mines where it's like a factory that he owns, but you can't access it. Going back one more generation, in Pokemon Sun and Moon, there's an electromagnetic plant on I think it's the 3rd island, 2nd island, that again, you can't access. You can see it through the Rotom Dex, but you can't access it. And this idea of there being a power plant or a factory of some kind that you can't access originated in Pokemon X and Y, where very famously there is a power plant that you can walk up to the door is locked, and there's no way to unlock it. How dare you, game, put in a locked door and leave no way for it to be opened? People have speculated that this might have originally been intended for Volcanion. I'm not really sure why. I think it's because Volcanion is a steam-powered Pokemon, and I guess it's a power plant, so maybe the 2 mix together quite well. I think they're probably right. That would work. However, another Pokemon of interest might have actually been Heatran, because in Lumio City, in one of the central kind of squares or plazas, there are 2 people talking, and they're talking about the Lava Dome Pokemon, which is Heatran. And it's interesting for Heatran to get a mention here, unless it's maybe tied into the story that was meant to be? I don't know, just some food for thought. Number 8, the peculiar Parfum Palace. Parfum Palace, of course, is a pretty early game location in the Kalos region. It is extravagant, featuring a number of different Pokemon as statues and on signs and in pictures and art. Everything's here, from the Zekrom and Reshiram statues in the garden to hedge mazes that look like Pokemon, although I could never work out if the hedge maze that you chase Furfrou around is supposed to look like a Pokemon or whether it's just supposed to be a maze. But what's really interesting about this place is a bit of art on the wall that when you interact with it, it tells you that it looks kind of like AZ. No, it doesn't. It looks like the real world King Louis XIV of France. It looks, as far as we can tell, nothing like AZ, and what's even more peculiar is just how similar Parfum Palace is to its presumed real-world counterpart, the Palace of Versailles. And interestingly enough, in the Kalos region, there is the Pokemon Hooper that can use its rings to transport things, supposedly, according to its own Pokédex entries, as large as castles from one point in space to another. Wouldn't it be interesting to think that Hooper moved the actual Parfum Palace from our universe to the Pokemon universe? Maybe, maybe not. This is a little bit more theoretical. Number 9. In the Lumio City Art Gallery, there's all sorts of cool Pokemon art, including official artwork for Castelia City and Ecruteak City, right down to Pokemon card art. The card Mr. Briney's Compassion and Town Volunteers can both clearly be seen, which I think is a really cool way of including Pokemon card art into the games, and I would actually like to see this again in future regions. It also has to mean that Mr. Briney is pretty well known across the Pokemon world. Right, moving on, number 10. I'm going for help. Wait in the usual place. Is a cheery little message that's written on a signpost at the north side of the Lumios train station. Yeah, nobody knows what it means. If you've worked out what it means, let me know in the comments. If you've ever heard a theory on this, I've never heard a, in my opinion, compelling Pokemon theory on what this message is about. And I remember playing Pokemon X and Y and searching for hours trying to work out exactly what this message was about. And yeah, no idea. Number 11, in Professor Sycamore's lab, there is a scientist who will tell you that Professor Sycamore studies evolution and learned a lot from Professor Rowan in Sinnoh, and it seems very likely that Sycamore may have been one of Professor Rowan's aides back in the day. First of all, it's not uncommon. Professor Oak also used to be a pupil of Professor Rowan. He might be the oldest of the Pokemon professors and seems to be a teacher to many of them. But specifically, a note can be found in Kuraway Town that talks about, it's from Professor Sycamore's point of view, talking about how when he first took steps into the region, what he thought and what he felt, meaning he's not originally from Kalos. There's even a theory by my friend Ovi that the character of Lucas, the rival character who's Professor Rowan's aide in Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, that is Professor Sycamore, just not yet grown up. Or with the amazing, amazing hair. He is so how does he, what? It's just wildly unfair. Look at that hair, look at those curls. Number 12, speaking of characters who are not actually from Kalos, we have the gym leader, the first fairy type gym leader, Valerie. I've also done a whole Pokemon theory about this, but it's more or less, I think it's confirmed by a signpost or by somebody in the gym that Valerie is in fact from Johto, but it's more than that. She's a kimono girl, or as I said in that original theory,
A type of Camino.
yeah, that thing from Star Wars. But she is a kimono girl, and we know this because all of the gym trainers in her gym are known as Furisode girls, and Furisodes are a type of kimono, and on top of that, her ace Pokemon is Sylveon, an evolution, like all of the kimono girls have on their teams. They all have evolutions. Right, number 13, for the next three, I'm going to get a little bit more speculative, so bear with me, see how you feel about these, and then we'll get back down to earth. But number 13, it's never outright been confirmed as far as I can tell. Maybe you can find there's an interview somewhere, I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure that the character of Serena is inspired and is the anime counterpart to Leaf, the female playable character from Fire Red and Leaf Green. Leaf's in a really weird position because in the original games, Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, there was no female playable character. They were introduced much later down the line. Ash's counterpart as he travelled around the region of Kanto was Misty, and after that we have seen all of the rival characters in animated form. Whether that's in Pokemon Chronicles or the main television series or just in the beginning of movies where they appear on the battlefield for a few seconds, we've seen all of them. Apart from Leaf. And at first glance, it is not hard to see the similarities between Leaf and Serena in their costumes. Just in my opinion, they both have relatively similar looks about them, and Serena has a very special relationship with Ash. And this is that she knew Ash from when she was a kid in the Kanto region. She knew about Ash from Kanto, much like Leaf would have known Red from Kanto, or rather, they're both from Kanto, they're both from Pallet Town, which is where Serena first met Ash as a kid. In my opinion, these two characters are kind of like Leaf inspired the creation of Serena, or certainly Serena took some creative liberties from Leaf. Or as we know her nowadays, Green. But that's just my opinion, kind of more of a speculative one, as are the next 2 points. So, next up, Mega Evolution, with the final movie of the Pokemon Black and White saga of all things, where Mega Evolution appeared, with Mega Mewtwo Y showing up for the first time. Even though Mega Evolution hadn't even been revealed at the time, this was Mewtwo's new awakened form, and that was all we knew. Of course, since then, we've come to learn about Mega Evolution and how it involves a trainer and having a bond with their Pokemon, an unbreakable bond, and with Mega Stones, they can then finally achieve the ultimate form, Mega Forms. Okay, so reversing the law here, how does that work for Mewtwo? Mewtwo doesn't have a trainer. Well, it can be speculated that Mewtwo in this situation is its own trainer. In the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo is self-described as the world's most powerful Pokemon and the world's most powerful Pokemon trainer, but it goes deeper than that. In the Pokemon Adventures manga, Blaine uses the DNA of his own arm to help create Mewtwo. And in the movie, in a Japanese kind of little prequel to the movie, we learn about Dr. Fuji's daughter, who's also being kind of clone saved at the same time as Mewtwo, and it's possible that her DNA becomes part of Mewtwo's makeup. Mewtwo is part human, part Mew, which is why Mewtwo is in more humanoid shape as Mew. Now, in the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo is on a rampage getting ready to destroy everything. But in this movie, Mewtwo is at peace with itself. It's actually trying to help out other man-made Pokemon like Genesect. And because of this, it's kind of like a trainer who is perfectly in balance with their Pokemon. Mewtwo is in balance with itself, and that's why it's able to Mega Evolve.
But you know, that one's just more theoretical, more speculative. What does seem a little bit more of a solid nod to me is number 15, the movie at the end of the X and Y saga. The Volcanion Magearna movie that featured a number of mega evolved Pokemon, each of them with purple eyes being controlled by the evil kind of the bad guy of the movie, and with a purple aura around each of them. Does that sound familiar to you? It certainly reminds me of Shadow Pokemon. From Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gala Pokemon, a purple aura and the kind of the purple eyes. And if you don't think they're trying to reference Shadow Pokemon here, in the game Pokken, we even get a mega evolved different form of Mewtwo that's known as Shadow Mewtwo. So I'm pretty sure this is a nod at Shadow Pokemon making a bit of a return in the film. Okay, let's move away from speculation and down to something a little bit more solid. In the games in Pokemon X and Y, Star City is like one giant reference to the next games in the franchise being Pokemon Sun and Moon. Again, in the animated series, we see inside the gym of this town, Olympia's gym, and it's like a giant observatory featuring stars and suns and moons and all that jazz. In fact, I mean, Olympia herself is like wearing a costume of Lunala. I mean, I'm not saying they're the same, but there's definitely a connection there that I've covered on the channel before. But more specifically, in Star City, there's a giant sundial. And a sundial alone does not a reference make, but if you talk to one of the NPCs near that sundial, they talk about how elsewhere in the world, there's such things as a moondial. Now, I looked up moondial at the time, and I'm pretty sure I couldn't find anything concrete. Sundial, moondial, Pokemon Sun and Moon, it's a reference. Number 17, in Snowbell City, there is a young lady who composed a track of music because she was in Snowbell City and it reminded of her home region. The music plays and it's this. And of course, that is Jubilife City because she's from the Sinnoh region, and with it being so cold, she's either from Jubilife City or perhaps she's from Snow Point. And speaking of other regions, number 18, there is an old lady in the region who talks about how in her hometown there are Pokemon centers with hot springs built into them. And of course, this is a reference to Laveridge Town from Hoenn, where there are hot springs built into the Pokemon Center. A cool and completely useless feature as far as I could tell, but I always really liked the aesthetic. Okay, two more. Number 19. Mega Evolution brought upon a lot of opportunities for Pokemon that didn't get the right love before. Let's take, for example, the incredibly popular Pokemon Gengar. Gengar's shiny and Gengar's regular form are pretty similar, but Mega Evolution fixes that. Where this gets really interesting is with the Pokemon Garchomp. See, there's always been this theory about Garchomp that is more or less confirmed. Garchomp came out the generation after Sharpedo. They both have very similar color palettes. They both have the stars on their heads. Gible is called the land shark Pokemon, and both Pokemon have the rough skin ability. More or less everything pointed to the fact that these two Pokemon are related. And then Mega Garchomp came along. And it's shiny, a beautiful bright pink, which of course goes hand in hand with Sharpedo's. These two Pokemon are related. And number 20, this is one of those Easter eggs and references that has taken new life and new meaning as the series has gone on. Originally, these games, of course, they still are, they're called Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. And the original thinking here was that this naming was peculiar, because previous namings of Pokemon, you know, red and blue, their primary colors, green, yellow, they're primary colors, they're the beginning. Gold and Silver feel like an advancement on that. Ruby and Sapphire, well, you got the red and blue orbs. Diamond and Pearl, adamant, lustrous orbs, they tie in with the legendaries. Black and white, the legendaries of those games are black and white. But X and Y, it does fit in with the shape that the legendaries kind of make. Xerneas is a giant X shape if you include its antlers and its legs, and then Yveltal can shape like a giant Y. But that's not the only thinking here. Also, people were thinking with Zygarde and the presumed upcoming Pokemon Z version, that you would have an X, Y, and Z version representing the 3-axis of a 3D shape, which makes sense because this was Pokemon's first footsteps into the world of 3D on the DS. However, we never actually got a Z or Pokemon Z, so this hidden meaning behind the kind of the names actually doesn't mean anything, because if it did, it would be referencing just the 2D world with the Pokemon X and Y axis. So yeah, that never ended up meaning anything, and I thought that was interesting enough to kind of include. And there you have it, 20 Easter eggs, references, little bits of trivia, things that I think are interesting, some Pokemon theories. And while you're down there in the comments letting me know if you've got any theories about any of this stuff,
Pokemon Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun and Moon time.
Well, 16 if you include the bonus one. So 16 Easter eggs, bits of trivia just to do with the Unova region, mostly focusing on Black and White and Black and White 2. I'm really enjoying just kind of compiling. Yes, I've watched a few other videos. One of the ones I have to credit, and I would recommend you watch after this, is by Eevee. Just in a whole video, some of our things are the same, some of them are totally different, but I absolutely recommend you check her out if you want more. And like I say, with this series, I try to focus on Easter eggs and secrets, but also I just drop a lot of like, oh, that's kind of cool or unique in there. So yeah, I'm just gonna get on with it. Thank you to all of those who are leaving likes, who are leaving comments, who are subscribing, who are telling the YouTube algorithm, hey, you should tell other people to check this guy out. But really nice, and I appreciate it, and hopefully people are finding videos that they want, including this whole playlist that you can watch after if you like. Right then, with that being said, let's jump on with, I guess, thing I think is cool number 1. Caitlyn of the Elite Four, newly in Pokemon Black and White, but Caitlyn has appeared in the series before. Any of you who didn't play those older games, who didn't play the Generation 4 games, how dare you? Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Platinum are amazing, and in their post-game in one of the battle facilities, Caitlyn appears, but kind of not as a Frontier Brain, but rather as a Frontier Brain's accomplice. I guess she is the princess of the Battle Castle, and her castle valet, Derek, he's the actual Frontier Brain. He'll battle for you because, as she says, when she battles, the force of her emotions woke the power within her. And the power she must be talking about here is a psychic power, because of course, she is the psychic type Elite Four leader from the Black and White games. Number 2, Pokemon Black and White 2 are the games that have the most static shiny Pokemon in them. Where there's Pokemon Gold and Silver and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where you can catch a red Gyarados that is always shiny. And controversially, originally a kind of more orange color, but that's a whole other thing. And here in Generation 5, with Pokemon Black and White 2, you can get gifted a shiny Dratini in White 2, a shiny Gible in Black 2, and a shiny Haxorus. All of them for different elements of completing the post-game, whether it's the Pokedex and going to the Nature Reserve, or the Black Tower or White Tree Hollow. You can get more shiny Pokemon here as a guarantee than I think in pretty much any other game. Although not a lot of Pokemon have a guaranteed shiny Pokemon that isn't part of some kind of distribution event. Number 3, going back to the first point about Caitlyn, there are not a lot of things that reference the amount of time between Generations 4 and Generations 5. For example, people tend to accept that Red, Blue, and Yellow and Gold, Silver, and Crystal happen a few years apart, and that Hoenn games happen at the same time as Kanto games, and Sinnoh games happen at the same time as the Johto titles, and that's all referenced by stuff in-game. But there's not a lot actually in the Generation 5 games themselves that help us with a sense of scale. Obviously, we know that Caitlyn has gone from being a Battle Frontier Brain type character to an Elite Four member, but the only other characters that we see that cross over are Cynthia, who has a little beach house where you can battle her, the Rocket Grunt that I mentioned in the Johto video, who is now grown up and has a kid, and in Black and White 2, actually an ex-Aqua and Magma Grunt move in with him as well. So I guess great minds think alike, not great minds. Anyway, because of later things that are brought up in later games, for example, Porygon's Pokedex entries, who talk about it being made with the latest technologies in Fire Red and Leaf Green, and it being made with the technologies of 20 years ago in Sun and Moon. Depending on whether or not you take that into account, the time frame between Pokemon Generation 2 and 4 and then Generation 5 with Black and White might be 2 to 3 years, or could be as much as 13 years. So a pretty dramatic time difference, and there are a lot of theories about this on this channel in particular. Moving on, speaking about theories, and I know a lot of these are going to be very theories focused, this is kind of an Easter egg. The character of Chantal has lots of information about a lot of characters that exist in the Pokemon world, and in one of these little information bites she gives, she talks about how Bertha of the Elite Four looks a lot like Agatha of the Kanto Elite Four, and that's really interesting. Just because it kind of implies that, one, that by the time of Black and White, Agatha is still around and kicking and doing her thing, or maybe she's become a ghost, like her ghost Pokemon. No, but Agatha is a pretty well-known trainer, and the fact that she looks like Bertha has also led to some interesting Pokemon theories of mine. I have definitely seen the connection, and yes, they have similar sounding names, but given that we don't know who Gary Oak's parents are, Blue's parents, depending if you're playing the game or watching the show, and we know that Agatha and Oak maybe have a love relationship, and Bertha looks kind of like, and we know that Blue has parents somewhere. Bertha, just a suggestion. I'll leave that one up to you in the comments. This one is a theory that is a lot less speculative, and that is that N is possibly a Zoroark. First of all, N is a very peculiar name with a very odd real name. N is able to talk to Pokemon. He's being used by Getsis to become a king of Team Plasma. It is a whole thing. And in Pokemon Black and White 2, you can do these things called memory links, where you talk to a character and you see one of their memories. Well, by interacting with a Zoroark, you see one of N's memories, but there's no Zoroark in sight. Could it be possible that N is a Zoroark? They have very similar hair, and Zoroark is an illusion Pokemon, and the opening cutscene of Black and White has N with a Zorua, and in fact Zorua and Zoroark seem to be very important Pokemon to N. He can talk to Pokemon. I actually think it's probably pretty likely. Stranger stuff has happened in the Pokemon world. Number 6, very sadly, Generation 5 is the last generation to have mythical events that are tied into in-game areas. The Liberty Island from Pokemon Black and White is the last place you can encounter an in-the-wild mythical Pokemon with Victini through the Liberty Pass that was distributed when the game came out. I would really love to do that event again, and I still have my Victini from when I did it. But after that, all the other mythical Pokemon of Generation 5, they have a mini event with a little cutscene in the games. But after that point, this is where mythical Pokemon started just being distributed out just willy-nilly, and so there's no in-game events. And that Victini heralds the kind of final point of in-game mythical events. Well, I guess until Deoxys in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, or Celebi in Pokemon Crystal Virtual Console, but it's kind of a little bit different. Pokemon Sword and Shield, I am looking to you. Come on, help us out with the DLCs. Number 7, you know how all Pokemon have hidden abilities? Well, that started in Generation 5, and they weren't called hidden abilities. They were called Dream World abilities, or Dream abilities, and that's because you could only get them from Pokemon you caught in Dream Balls from the Dream World. And what was the Dream World? Well, the Dream World game was a online, on your computer game where you could send your Pokemon at nighttime or just once a day, and they would dream, and you could do mini games and catch Pokemon with their hidden abilities or their Dream World abilities. And in fact, I'm pretty sure every Pokemon has had Dream World art to go along with their regular art, official art. And also there is also the Dream Radar minigame where you can still get Pokemon with their Dream World abilities now for as long as the eShop is up, which is something else I've talked about in a video very, very recently. Number 8, in Pokemon Black and White, there is a Ghost Girl. And I love talking about the Ghost Girls in this series, except this Ghost Girl isn't just a kind of random one-off as they are in many other games. This one actually has a whole plot tied to it. In the original Black and White, it was just a throwaway thing where you would go onto the Marvelous Bridge, see this Ghost Girl, and it would just disappear, much like the ones from Generation 4 with the old chateau. But when Black and White 2 came out, they decided to expand on this story, releasing the Strange House, where there's lots of books about nightmare Pokemon, and you can encounter other ghosts, and you can get the Lunar Wing, and if you take the Lunar Wing back to the Marvelous Bridge, you can then encounter Cresselia, and again, there are theories and stories all about this. But yeah, I guess that makes it the only generation where they've really adapted on the story of the ghost people in the world of Pokemon. Number 9, Unova has more gym leaders than any other generation or any other region. That's because in Black and White, the first gym has 3 gym leaders with Chili, Silent, and Crest. The last gym has 2, depending on your version that you're playing, either Drayden or Iris. And then when Black and White 2 came out, Sharon was now a gym leader, Roxy and Marlon were also gym leaders, so the roster is pretty huge here. Again, not really an Easter egg, not really a secret, just something I thought was cool to point out. Number 9, Hilda and Hilbert from the original Black and White, the protagonists, they've disappeared at the end of Black and White 2. Throughout Black and White 2, I believe, they talk about how N has gone off to travel to other regions and how Hilbert and Hilbert have gone with him. Those protagonists have gone off to travel the world with N. But by the time you get to the end of the game, N returns to Unova, but the heroes do not. And there's a lot of speculation online. There's a lot of people saying that in the code of the game originally, that you were supposed to be able to battle those characters through a memory link in the same way that you kind of battle Red at the end of Gold and Silver, this kind of rite of passage, which would have been really, really cool. Or that they were supposed to show up at the Pokemon World Tournament. Again, that would have been awesome, but they don't, and that was never planned, and that's not in the code. As far as I can tell, there's no official source for that. It's all just speculation. They just disappear, and I have no idea why. And I would love to see if there's a Pokemon theory about that. But yeah, they just disappear, and as far as I know, they were never intended to be in the game in the first place. Number 11, in the town with the PokeStar Studios, on the right-hand side, there is a tile that you can surf on that you shouldn't be able to surf on. It's a glitch. And this is a weird one because in a lot of Pokemon games, there is always usually at least one tile that you can surf on that you shouldn't be able to, like in Pokemon Red and Blue. I think it's something that's happened in games since then. And yeah, just kind of an old one, just a little glitch for you. You can surf on a tree, which you shouldn't be able to do. Number 12, another oddity. The Unova games at the time were very much slammed for the fact that they had so many legendary Pokemon in it. In fact, they had 2 legendary trios. They had the Genies, the Forces of Nature, and they had the Swords of Justice. As well as there being 4 mythicals in the region, it was actually quite a lot for the time. And Generation 4 had also been kind of slammed for a similar reason. And Generation 6, they kind of recovered it because they only had 3 legendaries and 3 mythicals. The odd thing here is that Generation 6 is the only region that doesn't have a kind of legendary trio. Well, I guess other than Sword and Shield now as well. The Alola region had that kind of quartet with the Tapus, and every region prior had legendary beasts, legendary golems, legendary birds. Actually, no, I guess with Sword and Shield we're getting the Galarian legendary birds and the new Regis. Which, you know, the original Regis were part of a trio. We might see a duo or a trio, I don't know. But the point is, the Kalos games, they didn't have any trios outside of the Box Art trio. And so it's kind of weird that Unova got 2, especially because Kalos is based off of France, and the 3 Swords of Justice are based off of the 3 Musketeers, you know, from France. That trio really should have been in Kalos. Again, maybe that's super speculative on my part, and a lot less of an Easter egg or a secret, but to me that makes sense, and so I kind of think that maybe that was meant to be the case, but again, super speculative of me. 15 Easter egg secrets and things that Toby just thinks should be a thing. Yeah, hey, they're my videos. Welcome, I hope you're enjoying yourself. Speaking of which, more speculation. Number 13, let's double down into this. In the Abyssal Ruins, there is the Relic Crown, and it is the same crown that appears in the opening cutscene of the Generation 5 games. The very crown that Getsis is using to coronate N. And here's the thing, it makes sense that there would be 2 crowns, and these 2 crowns are the 2 crowns because of course there were 2 kings in ancient Unova, the twin kings who fought with Zekrom and Reshiram. However, what's also of interest here, and something that's tied into a recent theory of mine, is that this crown looks exactly like Zacian's head with the 5 points. And it would make a lot of sense if the ancient kings of the Unova region had come from the Galar region initially, and why the crowns would look like that. Because that region also had 2 twin hero kings, and that region is based off of the UK. Galar is based off of the UK, and Unova is based off of America. And the people from real life America, Unova, were originally British colonialists who and then they made America as a place, the United States of America. So it would make sense if something similar happened in the Pokemon world with Galar and Unova. Number 14, Getsis' hand is never seen. His left hand, it's not seen. I mean, it is seen. It's seen in the animated series, but there's this whole theory that in the games, the reason you don't really see Getsis' hand is because it's been damaged in some way. And actually, I lied. There is one point where you do see his hand. Again, in that opening cutscene, in that coronation, you do see his left hand, and it's black. Sorry, his right hand. I don't know my left and my right, apparently. But his right hand, and it's black, as if it's been damaged, frostbitten perhaps, by Kyurem, the legendary Pokemon that he's after. So that theory, I think it kind of holds up. Also, his arms are black and white, like the game's black and white. Okay, so 2 more, number 15 and then a bonus point. Number 15, throughout the Pokemon franchise, every continent has been mentioned apart from 1. India has been mentioned in Raichu's Pokedex entries. I think China has been mentioned in Arcanine's. America, we've had the Lightning American, is what Lieutenant Surge is known as. The Antarctic Ice has been mentioned in Regice's Pokedex entries. Europe has been brought into it because, of course, France has been brought up because Fantina is French, and that was before Kalos was a thing. The only continent to have never been mentioned or referenced, as far as I can tell, in pretty much any way, is Africa. Africa just hasn't been really referenced much in the Pokemon world, apart from in the Unova region in 2 very small ways that I can see. Covagrigus and Yamask are very much based off of Egyptian mummies and sarcophaguses, so that's kind of a reference to Egypt, which of course in Africa. And there is a kind of traditional African mask in the Unova Narcine Museum. So all I'm saying is we need an Africa region or Egypt region or something like that. I think that'd be really, really cool. But yeah, it's just kind of weird. I think every other real world location has kind of been referenced by name specifically, or by names of locations within them here in the real world, just not Africa, which is, I don't know, we need more Africa, we need more Egypt. They're made out of rock. Anyway, right, and here's for the bonus one. In the movie Detective Pikachu, there is Unovan style pizzas. I don't know if it's just actually in the movie or whether it's just on the poster, but there are Unovan style pizzas, which are of course a reference to New York style pizza, which is, New York is kind of like the main basis for the Unova region.